We'll start by calling this meeting to order. This meeting of the South Lee School District School Board on August 11th. Where is it?
No, I'm muted.
No,
Oh.
computer volume.
Sorry, you guys. There we go, it's me. Okay.
So since we're still exploring how we're doing workshops in person and online, we ask you to bear with us a little bit on this. We will start, however, before we discuss how that is going to go with the event. Lauren, would you like to take that away?
Thank you. Moment, please. I'm pulling up the proper note. Excuse me a moment. I'm not able to see the screen that I usually read from, so I apologize. I can wing it. Maybe I'll wing it.
Sure.
So South Lee School District would like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the territory of the Coast Salish people. Stillaguamish, Suquamish, Snohomish, Coast Salish tribes whose ancestors have stewarded this land since time immemorial. And in acknowledging these people and their heritage in stewarding this place, we acknowledge their continued presence in our community. The treaty that was signed at Point Elliott in order to grant us permission to share the space, and our hopes for ongoing generative relationships with this land and its indigenous people. Thank you.
Okay,
Is there
now
going to
let's
be a
talk.
pledge of allegiance? I think that's great. Can we do the pledge real quick?
That's not on the agenda right now. We're going to work through the agenda as it is under. The next point is public comments. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're going to do public comments based on the combined format that we have here. So at this board workshop, we'll be engaging in discussion with the community, both in person and online, on the topics on our meeting agenda. We will attempt to integrate online comments with the discussion without taking away from the flow of in-person discussion. But if those online could frame their input as whole statements rather than partial responses to something someone said earlier, that would be very helpful. Basically, if you can have an entire idea there rather than just saying that you support what this person said, because it may have been some time ago before I actually get to it. During these discussions, we usually do respond to comments on the particular topic being discussed. But we want to be careful to speak from a place of knowledge. So if further research is needed, we may ask a community member to bring their question or comment to us through email so we can research and respond with accurate information. The first comment from a person must be accompanied by their first and last name and their location. After that, we'll try to recognize names and faces. If you want to continue to include your information, that would be helpful. Since we do have people participating in our Zoom webinar, we ask that those attending in person raise their hand and wait to be recognized before speaking. I'll try to keep my eyes up to call on people as I see hands up. It is inappropriate to use this discussion time to make derogatory personal remarks. To quote policy number 1400, however, the board recognizes the distinction between uncivil discourse, which it will not tolerate, and comments about the board, district, and/or staff that are negative, yet still civil in nature. For those in person, comments which violate the standard will be stopped, and the speaker will be asked to rephrase. For those participating online, the leadership team member reading the comment will attempt to edit out the derogatory portion, but retain the general content and context of the comment. As an example, saying that Director Williford is a fool is a derogatory personal remark. Saying that Director Williford's choice to disallow derogatory personal remarks as a foolish decision is not, because it addresses the action rather than the person. Okay, with that out of the way, we will move on to the first item for discussion on our agenda, which is board goals. We've been talking about these somewhat in our board retreats. And this is our chance to discuss what we think might be good board goals based on our board survey, based on community input, and all of those things along that line. It is also the tough chance for the community to weigh in on what they think board goals should be. We love hearing comments from the community on this. We are absolutely open to hearing them from a wide variety of folks on a wide variety of topics with a wide variety of viewpoints. Once that's settled, we'll talk about what we want to do for our board goals, and we will vote to approve them at our next meeting. If we get to a solution that we're all happy with. Any thoughts starting out? From the board, I'll start with the board, and then we'll open it up to the community here and online.
I have one thought related to getting into schools and connecting with staff and students. I think with proper COVID mitigation in place, it would be wonderful to be able to be in person, making regular visits. And
Yes,
I'd love to somehow formalize that in our goals if possible.
Along that line, with Dr. Campbell's presentation today, I would really like, if we embark on that, having kind of an intention behind what we're going through and what are we looking, what classrooms are we choosing and why, and what common discussion will be.
yeah, to have a purpose beyond simply getting to know the schools better, which is a great purpose in and of
Yeah.
itself, but.
Yeah.
Um,
I think, again, looking at Dr. Campbell's lecture from today, or training from today, I would love to make sure that we're connecting with youth on, as many levels as we can. Sometimes attending student club meetings or, with their invitation, of course. And just really learning who our students are in the district. Because I know that that's been some feedback from many parents, either being, really excited that we're engaging with their kiddos or feeling like their kiddos aren't heard. And so I want to make sure that we're hearing the folks who are feeling ignored.
Just, let's do, I think we talked about educating them. Let's get our scores up. Let's be more of a magnet school. Let's attract people rather than push them away. And I think those are a couple of good places to start.
I think there's some very interesting discussions we had about how to do that. Yeah, I agree. Some of the ideas that I had had from discussions that we had previously at the board retreat at the beginning of summer in particular were improved collaboration within the board and between the board and our legislators and between the board and other boards. Basically,
Yeah.
connect outward and
Yes.
become part of the larger school board and school and education community. Because particularly when we connect to our legislators, it's a wonderful way to bring the voices of our community upwards.
Absolutely.
I think it would also be great to identify learning goals that we as a board could support each other with a shared reading project or group of work. I know it's been done in the past prior to my board service, and I'd love to revisit the possibility.
That was 3 on my list.
Excellent.
So I'll jump ahead to that one.
Thank
that I had.
you.
Yeah, actually, no, it was 2. Yeah, 3, which was continued board training and education efforts for the members of the leadership team as a whole. However that takes place, whether it's facilitating discussions over common reading, whether it's watching videos together and discussing them, whatever it is. I think that that's a very valuable thing for us to not just learn more, but also to model continual learning.
I think to Damien's point, not only to think about the academics specifically, but think about which metrics we want to think through
Yeah.
so that our work is student-centered.
Next one that I had was recognize the efforts of our schools and staff in improving student learning and students in doing amazing things. Because I think that that's something that's come clear on our surveys is we're not recognizing the awesome things that are happening in our district as well as we could.
Part of that might be COVID related because we used to do that, especially from January through May on a regular basis. Joe did a very good job of bringing those students in here from band to poetry. We enjoyed that, so if we get past that with COVID, that's great.
Yeah, I'd love to have more students here to talk about what matters to them and what they're doing that they think is awesome, as well as what their educational staff thinks is awesome. Yeah. And then the last one that I have was find more and different ways to engage with students, families, and community members.
I think that's essential theme throughout.
Yes.
You could have a public forum every 90 days. on that, right?
Well, and
Separate from a board meeting, or you even have Joe do or similar to coffee in the morning, but to every 90 days do just a formal gathering, like when you first came down there at the high school. I can't remember what we were doing down there.
yeah, 2 summers ago, yeah.
Yeah.
That was on the emergency plans in particular. But, yeah. And Dr. Moshe and I have talked about reviving the coffee with the superintendent and possibly myself joining as well. So we can get some direct feedback.
It actually fits with the item on your agenda about Q and A.
Yep.
I think they want to talk about that.
Yeah,
Sure.
we can.
The whole idea of community conversations that are guided around the topic, I think that are more open as opposed to this format. Again, I'm hoping that we get a little bit more. I can't hope anymore about COVID. It takes a life of its own. But my hope is that we can be more engaged. And I think we can do that around the whole superintendent goals or student conversations. Just be going down that road.
Yeah, those are some viable strategies for sure.
Dr. Moshe, was there anything that you thought of that you'd like to see?
I think you've got a lot that you've put on the
There's a lot
plate.
there.
I think the idea of the board and its working relationship, I think is really important. I love the fact that we get to go back to WASDA in November. Because that's a really important opportunity. for the
Sorry,
board
I
to
can't
connect.
hear you back there.
So the opportunities for the board to connect at the annual conference, I think is really important. And I think that operating protocol that you have in place is, to be revisited and talking about the interactions with staff. I think all of that's really important and it would be a welcome opportunity. And we've started some of it. For example, Brooke and I are meeting with, and the rest of the board is welcome. We are meeting with new staff on the 23rd at 8:30. It's staff orientation. It's not a board meeting, so it's not open to the public, but the board is welcome to attend and we can let the public know that we're doing that. But it is orientation for our staff that are new. So we do that, again, pre-COVID, we did that routinely when we have new staff at the beginning of the year. So we serve a little continental breakfast and it's just a meet and greet, and then they go into nuts and bolts. But again, another opportunity for the board to know its staff.
Great, I'd love to meet them. Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of, we do have a long list here. There's 7 items on there now. And my hope is that we can take some input from the community. We've got a couple in Q&A there. I'm sure there are folks here who would like to weigh in also. And then as the board, we can narrow down on whether it's rephrasing things so they cover multiple of these or picking the ones that seem most important to us. I'd like to get it down to about 3. But
Absolutely.
so with that in mind, as folks are queuing up online, are there any folks here who would like to comment on board goals?
I was actually Damien
Could you start with,
Katya Williford Langley. Damien mentioned, so we talk about magnet schools and have we thought about doing more outreach with our neighbors north and Coopville and trying to do some work there to kind of make it so we're doing community work with Coopville, because we have similar goals there, small school, rural school. Just curious if there's thoughts about trying to maybe also reach out to the students in Coopville and students in South Whidbey and do more integration there as well.
Thank you for sharing that. This is my wife, is why I'm teasing her a little bit. I know that Dr. Moshe has gotten a good rapport with the superintendents up there, there and in Oak Harbor as well, throughout the COVID discussions and decisions and all of that. And we've connected briefly with some other school board members. But my hope is that part of the board connecting with their boards are ways that we can enhance that and find ways to come together as districts.
We do work cooperatively, on an individual student basis, but, and yes, I have a relationship with the superintendents in both of the island districts, and we do share things, like we've talked about sharing staff from time to time, so there are ways that we work together. The distance is a little prohibitive, but yes.
And we share athletically, like in golf.
Mm-hmm.
They may not have a golf team in Coopville, so they're welcome to join our golf team. Different interlocal things like that.
I really enjoyed getting to know the board and superintendent reps from Oak Harbor and Coopville when we were in our legislative session prep. So I'd love to see more collaborative work be identified in these schools we've mentioned. Thank you.
I have a question that dovetails yours. I love Erin Wilkie Freeland. I love the idea of becoming a magnet because I think we have a great community here, and I feel like there's a lot of really good hearts for the kids in this community. The numbers at the private school are booming and have doubled and have waiting lists. Have you guys looked into what is repelling students from our district?
I know that we've talked about getting in touch with the leaders of some of those private schools. I don't know that if we've done that yet.
We haven't done that yet. We do have some students who have left for other places, but we do get information on where they're going. But typically we don't start until September, when we really have kids in school, to find out who's really here and who's left.
But I do,
People make decisions all summer long and change their minds, so we don't typically do that until we get into school in September, because the first enrollment count is in October. But it's a great idea to do the outreach, and I know that we've had conversations. I am on a call, it will be monthly now, but we were on weekly calls with all of the leaders of all of the schools in our area, up and down the island, including Island Christian and the Waldorf School in Wellington, and there's a new Woodhaven High School. So we do have cooperative relationships. We can certainly talk with them.
yeah, because I think it's a very, very good idea to figure out what's attracting students to those schools and whether we can provide that as well or better.
May I ask a quick follow-up question to that?
This is supposed to
Oh,
be.
I didn't want to just keep talking that stuff. Thank you. Have you guys ever considered doing an exit interview with families who are pulling their kids, moving to another state or off island, whatever, but people who are staying local and choosing to educate somewhere else? Have you ever considered doing an exit interview?
We have done, not an exit interview, but we've done surveys. We've asked. So we've done that in the past.
But not all the surveys are answered, just like not everybody's gonna come to an exit interview.
Yeah,
Right.
even a phone call.
I do think it's valuable to know.
And the schools do that. The
The
board and
individual buildings,
superintendent typically haven't done it. The schools make those inquiries.
Do you guys compile that data so you guys know, since you're the ones kind of
We
steering
haven't,
the ship?
we haven't to date.
Okay.
Yeah, we've seen some
Some that
overviews,
that
but
Christie
nothing,
has
Yeah.
done.
but nothing.
There's been several times where I've asked Dan during enrollment report, so that's why.
He's investigated
Yeah.
pretty in depth.
He's always been able to provide that, if not on the spot within a day.
Yeah, and I've seen a very thorough report of that nature during a board meeting, but of course it would be using last year's data rather
Exactly.
than the data that's coming this September and October.
So when I pulled my kids out of the elementary school, I only had a conversation with the elementary teacher. No one ever reached out to me to ask why we left.
Well, we certainly have some ground to make up on making sure we connect it. Oh, we got one of that.
So from a parent who's had both.
Name and location.
Oh, sorry, Wendy Freeland. From a parent who's had kids in private school and public school, one of the big things that drew me over there was class sizes. And I think right now during this pandemic, I think that's a big concern, is the smaller class size, the less possibility of transmission. I'd love to speak more on that later when it's a great time, but I think that's a big reason people leave is the class size is such a concern.
Well, and I'd like to thank you for that. Thank you for sharing that. I would like to keep this focused on board goals at the moment, because the purposes of these workshops are to keep, to get community involvement on the topics that we're specifically looking towards. So thank you for sharing that. There aren't any specific questions here online about board goals. Are there any more? Yes.
Katya Wilford from Langley. There's a lot of talk of community outreach, but it always felt like that was happening in the mornings or the early afternoons as a working parent. Do you think you could move some of those to the evenings? I know I'm on a school-based calendar, so while I'm happy to come during breaks, I can't come during the day, but I'd still love to participate in the evenings.
So you mean like the superintendent coffee time
Yeah.
and those kinds of things?
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
even if it's just once a quarter or something like that,
Right. I
where
think,
evening parents or families could join.
Yeah, when I did it 2 years ago, I was overzealous and I was in the coffee shop every week. And we got a lot of people coming in and having conversation. But I think if we do it less frequently and more in, in varied times, I think we can probably capture more folks in that way and have it be much more informal, but at varied times.
And that would be even if the board decided to do something of a more casual conversation, having it just at different times would be really helpful for
Yeah.
varying families and community members.
And I know for us, if the board is involved, we generally have to be doing it in the evening also.
And if we make it the whole board, then we have to do this.
Right.
Until we are out of this COVID restriction, right? You can't just have a casual, you can never just have a casual conversation with the whole board, but you can have the whole board present and have workshops, but this makes it, like normally we'd be sitting around tables having conversation as opposed to this environment.
And what's the trigger point where, is it 2 board members or is
More
it
than two.
more than 2? So you guys could.
Right, and that's
two-
what, we'll do that for, that's why Brooke and I, can do a coffee time, or we can have the whole board present, like for a teacher orientation, as long as they're not doing any board business. It doesn't have to be open to the public.
Okay.
So there are degrees.
Graduation is. a big thing.
Right, right, because
Thank
there's
you
no
for the
board
clarification.
business being discussed and it's public.
If I can just add how valuable it's been for me to sit in on a couple of meetings that have been leadership meetings of Joan Brooke. I feel like I've learned more about how to serve as a board member, and I've also learned more about just who you are as people. And I don't know if it could be somehow incorporated into our board goals that there are rotating opportunities for that kind of engagement for every board member, and that it's not just an invitation, but an expectation.
And we can also rotate the time.
Yes.
Talk about that. If there's a time where we do so to an individual.
No, Joe, you're always more than flexible around our schedules.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that. I know there's been a couple times where you and I have chatted and that very, very easily available.
Well, I think that's a place where we can look at that overlying goal of board getting to know each other and working together successfully, professionally, and utilize that as a strategy. Like that's one strategy. Is maybe we rotate through those meetings.
You're also always welcome to, and these are in the evening, school open houses. Again, there's often the social time as well as and I know the principals really appreciate it when board members come, right? That those are important opportunities for evening, right? Where it's not another during the day thing. Because, school is during the day. So to see school in progress, it's a during the day opportunity.
Well, and there are also art shows and musical performances and school event,
Right.
sporting events and that sort of thing, which is fantastic ways for us to be in among the
Yes.
community, just enjoying it and celebrating the students at the same time.
And I always appreciate your calendar that you put out of board events.
Yes.
And so as we layer in students,
Yeah.
they can also share what's happening in the different schools, so we can attend it and put it on our calendar.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, and those calendars exist on our website for all the school events. So if you go on our website, on the homepage and look for calendars, there's a drop down. It's in there, probably under community. You can see those public events, so you can fill in. But you're always welcome to say to me, or just let me know, and then direct your comment to the principal to say, I'd like to come visit, with Thursday work. I'd love to see, an art class or science class. They will accommodate.
Thank you.
We do have a question here from those watching online. I don't have a full name here. So Candy B, can you please send me that information? I'm going to read the question because it's just a simple question here, but please share that information with us. The question is not necessarily an open question, but where are the board goals posted? I'm not seeing them. We didn't do board goals last year. We were in the middle of trying to figure out what we're going to do during the pandemic year. And so we didn't do board goals, so they're not currently posted. Candy Baum, thank you. They are not currently posted. They will be, I assume, once
you approve your
Yes.
goals,
We will post them as board goals.
and they'll be in the agenda and posted somewhere on our board. website.
I might also suggest that they, like we are doing with superintendent's goals, the board may want to think about making them dovetail the superintendent's goals, because the superintendent's goals then are part of the principal's goals, and they're part of the teacher's goals, and it filters that way. So, the superintendent's goals that you've created are in line with what you're talking about, but I would just talk about language so that they dovetail,
That's a fantastic point to try to get everything
aligned.
aligned all the way down through to what happens in the classrooms with the students. And that's a good way for us to remember that what we're doing is really there to make life better for the students.
Erin Wilkie, Freeland. I had a question about something you had said, Anne, about going to more club meetings if invited by the kids. I love clubs for kids. I think it gives them a voice to speak. I'm new to this new group. I'm not in it, obviously, the United Student Leadership. There was a roster and it was really big. So it was great to see so many people on it. And I was shocked to see so many adults in a United Student Leadership group. How are those kids' voices being heard if they're outnumbered? I mean, it looked like it was outnumbered. I didn't actually number it out, but there were so many adults. Even if there's 5 kids and 3 adults, sometimes kids get lost in that ratio. So how does that balance out with the student leadership group?
Well, I'd like to note that is not a school-aligned club. So that's not something that we have any control over. Actually, we're getting a little off topic, but I'd like, Jackson is a member, and so
I'm Jackson Murphy from Washington. There is a difference in United Student Leaders between members and adult allies, and I'm not sure what list you're referring to, but their core group is students. It's all students, and we have adult allies that support our actions, but they do not attend our planning meetings. So, yeah.
Thank you for your valuable question, Larry. And unfortunately, I can't speak to USL because I've never attended. I just know that it exists and that they do amazing work.
And then, just to clarify from the school district's perspective, we would meet with any group of students who wanted to meet with us and talk about topics. And we do.
And we've actually talked about the possibility of having some times where a couple of board members go into the schools and
Right.
make themselves available to students,
Right.
specifically during lunch or something, to just talk.
And the difference, and again, I don't want to go too far off topic. The difference is when students have a club that is school sponsored, they have an adult mentor in the school. They have to apply to their principal for that club to be approved, then that would come to the board for approval, and they have bylaws, and that is different than a group of students from our high school who have come together in their own format. I don't want to kind of grasping at straws, but like if a group of our high school students happen to be in 4-H, and the 4-H group said, hey, we'd like to meet with you and talk about issues that pertain to us at our high school, we would meet with them. So it's that kind of difference, that they are a group of students from our high school that we.
And we've also been doing that with community members as well, particularly.
Sarah McDougal from Freeland. Is it okay to just go a little bit further on this topic?
I'd like to get back to our agenda. Is this something that you feel is critical on this?
I would just like to speak as an adult ally with the United Student Leaders. And just say at the beginning of every meeting, there are working agreements that are gone over. And it's very explicit that the students are the leaders. The adult allies are there to observe. And if the students want some input from adults, because we have more experience, they will ask us for that. So it's very clearly stated in the working agreements. And every meeting, they go over these.
Yeah, I'm going to go just one last comment on this subject, since you've got your hand up, and then we'll move on back to the agenda.
Morning, Lynn Clinton. So to that point, and again, USL's a group outside of school. If the 4-H club decided they would have a protest, or if let's change it, 4-H club, let's just say it's a golf club, I don't know, some club, decided they were gonna have a protest against the 4-H group for whatever reason, or vice versa, would it be appropriate for the board to attend one and then not the other, or to attend the counter protest against that other group?
Board members are individuals outside of the board as a whole and can make choices as to what causes they do and do not support.
But I just asked those. Kind of what that by themselves.
And I do want to get back to
Thank
the
you, of course.
agenda items. So
Go ahead.
we do have 7 ideas for goals here. I'm happy to read them off again so we can look at how we had them gathered together. And I also brought up the superintendent goals. Thank you, Dr. Moshe, for that suggestion. So we can work on dovetailing those together. So the 7 points that were brought up were intentional school visits, connecting with students as broadly as possible. And some of this is my paraphrasing. If I'm getting anything wrong, please let me know. Improving educational scores and choosing metrics intentionally for how we evaluate scores. Attracting more students. Continual learning for the board, for the leadership team. Recognizing the efforts of our schools, staff, and students, and finding more and better ways to engage with the community.
So if I go through that with those set goals of restorative conversations, focusing on teaching strategies that meet the needs of all students, and then transformational leadership. The in-person visits with a rubric would fit under goal number 2. The connection with the youth would kind of fit across all 3. Because part of the purpose with the transformational conversation is that we don't know what we don't know. The collaboration across the board, I think, would also create more of that transformational leadership. And Marty, I think it was you at the retreat mentioned like having us pair off on different projects so that we could get to know each other more on an individual basis, because we can't meet in groups. And I think that would fall into there. Along with the learning goals, Marty, that you mentioned, recognition of staff and students, and like how do we attract students to our program with the under goal number 2.
And more and better ways to engage with the community. So clearly goal 1.
Yeah,
And
And,
some of this staff support goes here too.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm cheating off your paper.
you're fine.
and recognizing the efforts is, I mean, that's 1, 2, and 3. So for those who are following along behind at home and don't have this in front of them, we have the 3 goals for the superintendent. We'll just go over them again. So we talked about them at the last meeting, but goal 1 is restorative conversations. Dr. Moshe will lead the district's engagement in and facilitation of restorative conversations with students, staff, families, and community members, leading to identification of new and continuing action areas. Goal 2 was learning growth for all students. Dr. Moshe will lead the district in prioritizing training and implementation of best practices that create learning environments supportive of every student's success in the future they choose. And goal 3, which was transformational leadership, is Dr. Moshe will participate in and lead the district leadership team in transformational leadership development to dismantle systemic barriers for students. Just so everyone knows what we're talking about when we're talking about goal 1, goal 2, and goal 3.
Wait, what was the last one thing to dismantle? What are you trying to dismantle?
Dr. Moshe will participate in and lead the district leadership team in transformational leadership development to dismantle systemic barriers for students.
Systemic what?
Barriers for students. The idea being that we want to make it as easy as possible for all students to get to the education that they want.
And this is all on the
So-
website,
Yes.
if you're not able to take the notes that quickly.
Chair Brooke, So-
Where on the website is the goals?
Well, it's on the agenda for last business meeting,
Okay, and then will be posted under the superintendent page as we go forward,
and it was in the Navigator also.
right? It was also in the Navigator. And if you're not on our mailing list, you can email Christie and you can get on our mailing list.
thanks. Larry Christensen, Freeland. Define transformational leadership, please, because I mean, I hear these buzzwords and phrases and it's all great, short. I've been on the site, saw that. What is that?
Marty had a great.
Yeah.
We
We
used to have
went
coffee.
into some detail about that last time we gathered, I believe, but I would say it's leadership that gets us from where we are to where we don't yet know we can be, because we don't yet know what we don't know. And so rather than doing the same, leading in the same ways, hoping for different outcomes, it's developing capacities within ourselves that actually evolve who we are as leaders in service to meeting the demands of our communities and our scholars' experiences in new and different ways that we may not even be able to fully conceive of from how we are currently resourced as leaders. So when we are better resourced, when we can grow our internal capacities for these adaptive challenges of our times, then we can provide a different, more high quality experience for our scholars that requires us to be better resourced as leaders in education.
So like a great.
I was just gonna give a very practical example of something that we worked on that we've transformed, and that is discipline. We used to be zero tolerance with discipline. We used to be punitive. If a student transgressed, they were punished. That was the end of it. Now we engage in restorative practices with our students where they understand what the harm was. We have restorative circles. We talk about, we bring students together instead of just suspending or anything to that nature. So it's created a transformed culture. And that's what we're going for, so that we're creating a culture for our students where they are feeling empowered and part of their high school, as opposed to just, you know, you did that wrong, you're out.
And I would say that when the state changed those laws, because a huge part of our shift was in response to the state changing the rules around discipline, there was a lot of hesitation about how is this gonna work, and our kids just gonna get away with everything now, and there was a lot of feelings of that. And that's the part of the transformational piece where you don't know yet. And as the leadership team embarked in that and went through that process of learning how to approach it differently, how to think about it differently, their perspectives as leaders and their perspectives as educators changed as a result.
And it has had a definite impact for the students as well. Discipline rates, I think we're 50% down.
Before COVID.
Yeah, before COVID,
Yeah.
yeah. So I do have one question here from from online that I want to get to, just to make sure we're integrating this. I do want to keep our direction on board goals. We've had discussions on the superintendent's goals, and we voted on those, we've approved them. We certainly want to get feedback on them as we go, but we want to focus the discussion on what we're doing going forward. So I've got a couple of comments here from Holly Cervantes. Can you name the systemic barriers, please? And will the focus of classroom time consist more of these three goals than teaching and helping the children to be literate in their actual studies? To address, sure.
So just a reminder that, are we supposed to be asking for community as well, right?
Location.
Yes, location, yes.
Okay.
Holly, could you please enter your location there?
Oh,
as well,
okay,
so we
or
can-
Holly's here, could tell us, or.
She's in Clinton.
She's-
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Clinton.
So a systemic or educational barrier would be anything that's creating an obstacle that one student would have to overcome that another student wouldn't. So for example, if a student requires wheelchair assistance and you have a non-ADA compliant building, the fact that your building is not ADA compliant would be a barrier to one student, but is not a barrier to the other. So we rectify that by when we look at those situations, we make sure that all students can enter the building and all persons can enter the building. If you think about it educationally, if you look at something like a student who's experiencing homelessness, their barriers may have to do with food insecurity, they may have to do with clothing insecurity. Do they have a place where they can do their homework? Do they have access to Wi-Fi? Do they have the ability to walk into the classroom the same way another student does? And sometimes they're obvious ones, and sometimes they're less obvious ones. So if you're an unaccompanied youth, who signs your permission slip? And how do you get to go on a field trip? That would be an example of an educational barrier. So what ways that we work around that is we have district policy that says if you're an unaccompanied youth, the school district can sign on your behalf for something like a permission slip. And so we provide washers and dryers for kids to wash and clean their clothes. We provide food to families that need it. We help them with housing support. And by meeting those needs that are often unseen, because that's not something a student necessarily wants called out, we're making it easier for them to come into a building and focus on learning. And then as we identify more of those and we work to find solutions to solve that, more students are able to access their education differently.
Yeah, and the thinking is that all of this is entwined with reading, writing, and arithmetic. So this isn't something separate from it. This is
Yes.
very much part of it.
And bringing that back to, oh, sorry, Marty.
So, I was just gonna say, if I could speak to the second part of Holly's question, she asked about if we'll be focusing on, helping students with their academic studies. And I would say, helping to address these systemic barriers does provide a learning environment where students can achieve academically. And B, the second superintendent goal, which I know we're not here to discuss tonight, but it really directly touches in on that learning growth, which is such an important part of our focus in the coming years of district.
You had your hand up first.
Sarah Hamilton, Freeland. You were saying earlier about the way you're going to discipline kids. My daughter graduated this high school. Y'all let her get drunk at school. Not a phone call to me. You released her to a minor. To a minor to drive her home. Talk to the principal. Well, it's not that big of a deal. Okay, that girl ran away. That girl was down 18-year-old wreck. From the 6 months, 9 months she came here. I'm now having to look at putting my son here. I'm very hesitant. We talked about race and blah, blah, blah. I'm not from here. Okay, this is the widest area I've ever been in my life. And my son is going to be looked at nonstop for being white. And it is insane to me to just, you have to set people fail. We're going to be nice. Oh, it's okay. We'll give you a little pass. Guess what? The world is hard. You go to a job and you don't do it right, you get fired. You don't be like, it's okay, we'll go through it. You all know that. These kids are going to go out there in the world and get stomped on. It's not nice out there. We can't sit here in this little private island. Last time someone said you live in a bubble. I don't live in a bubble. Okay, not at all. I mean, this is crazy here for me. And I'm not one to actually ever really talk. So me to even have my shaky voice going on right now, I don't even know if my kid's gonna be in school. Unfortunately, I have enough brain damage. I don't know if I can teach my kid at home. I don't know what other abilities I have to give him an education. But there's so much things that are so wrong with the school. And I came to the last meeting, and a lot of times you said someone can't direct, you can't go to someone, direct them in a mean way, but yet you let a guy get up and attack Damien. And a couple people said, hey, wait. And he said, no, it's good. It's good. It's not good. It's not good.
I appreciate
You're
it.
breaking your own rules. You guys sat in a meeting today over at the high school. No mask on school grounds.
Ma'am, I appreciate your passion. I honestly, truly do. As a parent myself, I understand the passion that one's children inspires me. And I appreciate you taking the time and courage to speak up. I honestly do. I do want to keep this focused on the things that are on the
You can't
agenda.
get focused on saying the dang Pledge of Allegiance.
I'd like
I
to,
have emailed every principal from the small one, but still North
I'm
Campus.
sorry,
Yeah,
Sarah,
excuse
can we
me.
get back to the board agenda, please?
we need to keep on our agenda. We need to keep on the discussion on the agenda.
Because you don't want to focus on anything else.
If you can't,
Because you don't want to focus on anything else.
if you can't stick to,
I can do it too.
ma'am, if you can't stick to this, I will ask you.
I sit in 3 other boards.
If you-
I went to the Oak Harbor one.
I'm sorry, man, I'd like you to step out right now,
Why?
because you're not
My
obeying the
taxpayer pays
rules.
for this school.
You're not
can't do
sticking
that.
to
Yeah,
the rules.
the law.
Yeah, no, it is not.
I have a voice.
Excuse me,
I have the right to have a voice.
excuse me. I'm going to reference our board policy on,
Read it to your own self how you broke the rules last time then.
Tara, you were my next door neighbor. You
I
know
know
how to
I was.
reach me. If you would like to take up some of these topics with a board member, you know how to reach us. I
I
think
do.
right now,
But
we
you know
have a
what?
lot of
Y'all
work
don't
to
listen.
do and a lot on this
So-
agenda.
Let's clarify one thing, first of all. The rules are around masks. That if we are outside and there are no children present, we are able to be without masks.
And I asked you the last time, I asked right here, last meeting, I said, why can't we meet outside?
Because this board meeting has to be broadcast to the public.
Then we adapt. That's what we have been doing for the last year and a half, and we adapt.
I'm really sorry that you're frustrated, but I would really like to at least explain what the rules are. So if you would just let me, then you can come back, but so we are obligated under the law to broadcast the meeting so that the public can participate and not be present at this time while we are in COVID under the governor's rules. So in order for us to do that, last meeting, and I remember clearly that you talked to us about being outside. In order for us to do that last meeting and this meeting, we have to be inside and be able to broadcast it. We did adapt the last time. It wasn't quite as hot and we left the door and the windows open. It's now almost 90 degrees, so the door is shut. We don't have people outside and we are inside with masks on. When we were at our meeting earlier today, it was perfectly appropriate to be meeting outside without masks, and we did that purposely. We also live streamed it outside. It's not conducive to have a board meeting in that environment in the evening. We did it in the afternoon. As for your daughter, I'm not sure what the situation was, but I would love to talk with you about it. If something happens like that, and I don't know about it, I can't help with it. I am always open to meeting with
Ask your
people.
principal about it.
If you would like to meet with me, I'd be happy to. But as the board chair said, this is a board workshop in public about specific topics. So that's really what the business of the board is. So I know that it's upsetting and people are frustrated. I understand that, but there's still a format here that we're following. So it would be really awesome for you to be able to participate in that way tonight. And if you want to meet with me or a member of the board and I'm happy to.
Yeah, so how does any other person get?
Just like that.
Can I just ask a question? How does anybody get a topic that needs to be discussed on your agenda?
Well,
So
that's
I don't have to sit
part
here.
of
and
the
I need
figure
to
it out.
object to this. I came here to hear you. I didn't come here to hear an individual conversation. I would really appreciate it, ma'am, if you would take your conversation to the board outside at some other occasion.
Why is your
Sir-
comment more important
sir-
than hers?
sir, I do want to keep interjections to a minimum, so please wait until you're recognized to speak. Sorry, I'm trying to shift gears back here. As Dr. Moshe said, we will certainly meet with you if you'd like.
We have met with individuals in this room who have concerns that want to bring those concerns forward. This is a board meeting in public. You have access to the board. You can email the board, you can set up a time to meet with board members, you can meet with the superintendent. I am happy to. This is not the format for just an open-ended conversation. If you let the board get to the rest of their agenda, that's something they want to talk about, is how to engage with their community. How do we do that in a way that allows people to ask their questions, get answers, and help the district move forward?
Isn't that what you're doing in a workshop earlier? So now we're just sitting here and watching you guys have the same
That's
conversation.
what's on this evening's agenda, and that's what we'd
If
like
they
to
can
get
get
to.
to their agenda, that's where they're headed.
And for a note to everyone here, one of the points that is an example of uncivil comments or comments that create a material or substantial disruption of the orderly operation of the board meeting. If we can't conduct our business, that is a disruption to the board meeting. And if anyone does so, they will be asked to leave, and according to our policy, may be asked to leave if the board as a whole decides to do so.
It's a great segue into your.
Well, we still haven't finished that.
So you,
I want to get back to
we need to
board
get board
comments. Board goals.
okay.
Are these two questions on board goals?
Yes.
Okay, you had your hand up first.
So I think it's important to note that the superintendent goals and the board goals, they're separate from principal and teacher goals, correct? So the concern about how are students being educated in their growth, that's teacher level and principal level. And then we have superintendent and board, just so I'm understanding the tiers there.
Well, they are all interconnected because we have to set the policy so that the superintendent can enact the procedures to make the learning environment conducive to learning.
So, but it's not the superintendent's responsibility to teach the students directly, it is
Correct.
the teacher.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And so.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair Wilford. So just to make sure that we don't lose the direction on this, they were appropriate comments. It was a specific, because I had started it by what's transformational leadership, then the definition, then the application, which was more of more of the carrot rather than the stick. Okay, and so then the comment was brought up that there was not enough proper repercussion, which actually was, I would say, is a real legal issue with a minor, that if the school officials have turned it over. So it really was a rubber meets the road. Whether it got hot and drawn out, I don't think it should be discounted that wasn't appropriate, maybe amount of time, maybe.
I agree with you
So-
that the initial comment, and I really do want to thank you for sharing. And I want to be clear that I very much appreciate
Right,
that.
so
because
it is
the initial part-
workshop related that the board should
The
realize.
initial part was,
Yeah.
I felt that it
Yeah.
shifted
Yeah.
outside of that.
Okay, so what I would really like to ask a question about is, I had to move up here when you were discussing, and this is on your agenda, specific item as far as board development, training. Couldn't hear it, muffling, so I apologize. Do you have an annual training session planned? Is it's something in normal policy and procedure?
So we have several ways to do board training. It is within our policies that we must do training. It is within the regulations laid down for us, I believe by OSBI, that we must do specific types of training for the board. It is not explicit to my knowledge.
So the
On
board is required in their first year of service, and then every other year. In their first year of service, they are going to, in November, get training on open public meetings law. They will get training on public records and what is a public record and how they are creating public record. And they also have required training on equity. So those three things are required for board members. They go to an annual conference in November for 3 days. And that's already scheduled. Whoever the elected board members are will be attending that. And they have all of those required trainings as well as workshops on a variety of other topics. But the board can also set its own training. And this board, the South Whitby School Board, not necessarily these members, have done book studies. They have done workshops together. They have done the legislative training. So that is something that is occur regularly.
And so it's us looking to go beyond the requirements put down and see how we can better serve this school district by becoming better informed. I believe that's the intention behind it, better informed and better connected.
Thank you. Back to board goals.
Yes.
Okay, I've got 3 super rough, so get ready to wordsmith. First one is board will engage in conversations regarding student needs, student needs to achieve the mission and vision. So I'm trying to tie it back to that. I don't like that one yet. The board will engage in learning blocks to see the teaching strategies in classrooms. And with that, I think we focus on those gaps that we have identified that aren't meeting standards. So we go to the special ed classrooms, we go see what our title programs look like or what our lab programs look like. We go see what's happening there. And I'm strategically calling it a learning walk, not a classroom visit, because that's a different reason for being. And then the third one, board will engage in intentional or engage in internal and external collaboration with board members across the region and amongst ourselves. And I think that would fit. It doesn't have the PD piece that you were talking about, Marnie.
Yeah, there's some wording that feels maybe a little smoother on that third point would be board will engage in collaboration with members of this and regional school boards.
Well, is WASDA reenacting the regional meetings every quarter yet? Or not?
There have been some virtual.
Yeah, but I mean in person.
I don't know if they'll be in person yet, they haven't come out with it. This latest variant is shaking things up again, so.
And just as a note, let's be very careful to project as well as we can, because we are talking not only through our masks, but also through our masks to a camera.
Yes.
So that you guys know what the question I was asking was, WASDA is a statewide organization that all school districts come together once a year in November for workshop sessions. Then throughout the year, 3 to 4 times a year, we have different regions within the state of Washington for WASDA existence. And so they bring those school district directors within that region together, usually give a light lunch or dinner type thing. And it's collaboration as well as additional education. So.
Yeah, so there are several opportunities for board education.
I'm curious with this first point that you suggested, Andrea, board will engage in conversations regarding student needs to achieve the mission and vision. Do you anticipate naming conversations with whom? Is it conversations among ourselves?
I
Is it
think-
conversations with students?
I think it's larger, right? It's conversations with students, it's conversations with community. Some of it's restorative, like we need to have conversations around that. And some of it is also just looking at, brings up Damien's point of the magnet school, right? Like what is it that students who have graduated feel like they were lacking? Or what is it that that we maybe do exceptionally well that we need to promote more?
Right.
And also included that could be educational experts, like Dr. Campbell Bay,
Yeah.
who can help us better serve the.
But I think it's important for us to keep it up at that higher level, because it's not our job to set course curriculum. It's not our job to say we need to shift or move in this direction. It's really about having the input and all of the voices at the table so that we know how to set the direction,
Sure.
not do the work.
Right.
Right.
So what I would say in both of these first two, in order to make it an umbrella true goal rather than a kind of a set of strategies, because that comes next. Maybe here in this communication piece, we're talking about connections.
Yeah.
We're talking about finding connections with youth. So does that mean going into a classroom or going to a lunch hour or going to a sporting event? And just finding ways to observe and engage with youth. I think that's because we talked specifically about that student component. And then I would see those learning walks then as a strategy.
Yeah.
And so, but I also think that, again, using the word engagement with, let's see, I had it in the, because I was like this wording about, you know, the goal is to achieve an understanding of what our youth, what our families, what our staff will know and believe already about our mission and vision. So that as we do that transformative learning, we are using those things from our customers, our students, to engage in our work more specifically. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And with the second goal.
I don't know how to say it yet, but that's in my head.
I tried to keep it broad enough so it would survive, but I think of like the inclusionary grant that isn't happening, and there's a huge focus on universal design for learning on that. So it's going on a learning walk as a board and looking for what are the components of universal design. Now, to Marnie's point, that means that we as a board would have to learn
know what
something about
that is.
Universal
UGL.
design, right?
And so we would have to learn more about what it looks like to be able to see it. But that would help us gauge.
It felt to me like, I agree with Dan, that board will engage in learning walks, felt like a strategy to do the first one that we were talking about, rather than a separate goal itself.
Yeah, it's, I
almost
think
like-
it's the intentionality of, we're gonna learn these things by making sure that we're in the buildings and talking to
Yes.
people.
It's almost like the overarching goal is about, you know, connections. And then when we look at goals under that, we're, you know, taking kind of 3 tracks, like working with youth and students, you know, children and youth, working with, you know, staff and families and community, and then collaborating amongst each other in an educational pod. So that almost feels like 1, 2, 3 right there.
Yes. What do you got, Marnie?
Yeah,
Take it away.
so I've just rewritten the first one a little, it might be a little more inclusive of things beyond conversation. So board will engage, connect, and communicate to understand student needs so that all are supported to achieve the mission and vision. And under it, they may do so by working with students and in schools, working with colleagues and in the community, and working with members of this and other boards.
That kind of rolls it all into one
Yeah,
cyclical goal.
yeah, then there's one goal with 3 pillars to it.
Sure.
Yeah, it feels like the design of that is for board learning as opposed to board. You know, we always have to sort of make sure that we're in that place of, one of you said it, you're not doing the work, you're observing the work.
Yeah.
You're taking in what's happening, you're getting a sense of what's the belonging like for kids, what's the climate like in the building?
Yes.
What is it, you know, what, all of those pieces so that you're better informed to say, hey, you know, let's move in this direction.
Sure.
I kind of like that pillar under one overarching goal. I do want to acknowledge we have someone out there.
Yeah, sorry, my name's Stephanie Schreiber. I live in Green Bank. Kind of new here, so I'm just I was reading the last meeting and now I'm kind of listening and I'm not sure that I'm following, you know, all of your buzzwords and everything, but you know, I think the goal, the main goal, needs to be able to prepare students to be independent, self-sufficient adults.
Yep.
And I think that needs to be at the top of your list. When I sent my kids to high school, that's what I wanted them to be able to do. I wanted them to be able to graduate and move out of the house and take care of themselves and be healthy, self-supporting, responsible kids.
Yeah.
And
I
I
think
don't
we're all-
really get the feeling with hearing all of your goals, they're very lofty, and all of the listening and all of the support and all the social work and everything. I don't really get the feeling like you're saying to these kids, you know, we're going to provide you this education in order to prepare you to get jobs, to understand how to balance your checkbook.
So
So, ma'am?
that's the connection to the mission and vision.
Yeah, if you haven't taken a chance to read our mission and vision.
It's impossible to read at this range, but.
It speaks exactly to that, and it, you know, the vision is that every South Whitby School District student is a lifelong learner who is multiculturally engaged, literate, and an active community member. That speaks to what you were
I don't
talking
think
about.
that didn't speak to what I said at all, excuse me.
Able to meet the challenges of our global society.
But that's not what I said. I said, I want my kids to be able to be independent thinkers and be able to be responsible and take care of themselves. That's not what that says. To be global and a lifelong learner is not the same as someone who's able to take care of themselves and be responsible and be mature. That is completely different.
It
When-
actually is the mission. That's after the vision, if you read the mission.
In collaboration with our community, every student will be supported to be a resilient, innovative, compassionate, and productive graduate prepared for a diverse and dynamic world.
Well, that doesn't say what I just said. I mean, it refers to it. But, you know, I don't want my kids to require to lead the community in order to succeed. I want the school to prepare them and give them the tools so they'll be able to succeed on their own. So I guess I don't quite agree with your mission statement. I don't feel that that's what a school should be doing. But anyway, that's my opinion. And I'm glad you're open to hearing it.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. There may be something at a later date when we look at our mission and vision statement again where we can clarify some of those points.
I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Ma'am, I believe you had your hand up first.
Yes, Erin King at Mobile, I'm a student here. I just wanted to say to that last point. That it does very much prepare us to be independent. Like I'm 69, I'm a full-time job right now. And they give us a lot of opportunities for industry and for like careers that we want to focus on. So there's definitely a lot of like room for that. I would say I think we're doing pretty well on that part.
Okay, yeah, thank you very
As a
much.
student.
I was just saying that I feel that should be a goal, and it's not listed as a goal. I'm glad that it's having that effect on you, but that's a good thing.
Thank you. I appreciate hearing student voices. It's wonderful to hear actually where the rubber hits the road and how our policies and procedures are affecting students. You have something on goals?
I just would like you to read that one more time, Arnie. I've lost track of where you
Yeah.
guys are with your
I was just
statement
gonna
so
ask
far,
the same
because
thing.
I don't have paper in front of me, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the current version, which is as I've typed it, so it's not been agreed upon yet. As I've typed it, it reads, and it's different than last time I read it. Board will learn, engage, and communicate to understand student needs so that all are supported to achieve the mission and vision. They will do so by connecting with students and scholars, connecting with colleagues and community, and connecting with members of this and other boards.
Thank you.
Students and scholars might be synonymous, but I wanted to have a pattern of 2 words, so maybe it's students and children. I don't know.
Like scholars, I think there's no difference between a student, I mean, I think there's a very big linguistic difference between a student and a
Right.
scholar. I think scholars, it has a weight to it that tells us that every student, every human can learn at a rigorous pace and become that independent person who can make their way in the world and also be connected to the world.
And I love patterns, but I think that we just need more.
Yeah, and I would suggest to see if we really want to, scholars and alumni.
I like that, that's supportive of my longing for parallel structure.
Yes.
So if you read that one more time, because I can't write very fast.
I'll read it slowly, thanks. Board will learn, engage, and communicate to understand student needs so that all are supported to achieve the mission and vision. They will do so by connecting with scholars and alumni, connecting with colleagues and community, and connecting with members of this and other boards.
And by colleagues, we're talking about ourselves, we're talking about staff, we're talking about other peers in our educational
Yeah,
community.
we might want to define, we might want to use a word that's more definitive, like administration, staff, and community.
Brooke, we might have an issue in our Zoom where we might be getting hacked.
Oh,
And we
look at
might have
that.
to call our meeting.
Why, yes, we are having a problem on Zoom with Q&A coming through. No one but us is seeing this.
Yeah, so
Um,
that's fine.
So I think that we can continue on. Christie, are you able to dismiss those comments?
Or remove the person.
Yeah, we can dismiss them. They're inappropriate.
Yes. So I think that those that goal and 3 pillars beneath it, I like that. What do other folks think?
I think that there's lots of room for a lot of these strategies we talked about, like whether we want to do a learning together. I think they speak to engaging at all levels. I like where it's going. I did see a hand up. I don't know whether.
I don't know how to fit things in where you're talking, but as far as transitional learning,
Ma'am, would you be willing to share your name and location?
Laurel Eckner, Revere.
Thank you.
I would like to know what you're attempting to teach the kids by not having them say the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag.
I think, I think that does not apply to our agenda.
First of all,
Yeah.
just let me clarify, this board has never said the pledge, and it hasn't said the pledge in easily 15 years, long before I got here. Every student, every day says the Pledge of Allegiance in school. Yeah, they do.
A student will say the pledge almost 3,000 times
Yep.
from kindergarten through 12th grade.
It is said over the,
Campus principal.
yeah, it's
Three
said
emails.
over, it's said every day in every school. So. Is it not students?
I would confirm that during morning announcements, we do say it. Yes.
Also confirm that.
Thank you.
In the high school.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Because I have 3 emails from
We are all.
South Campus.
So.
Yeah.
Didn't know we were supposed to. Sorry, we don't have time. We'll get right back on it. So you're raising generations that is getting weeded out.
So I think coming back to the goal, I'm uncomfortable with, uncomfortable with like, giving any kind of percentage for that.
You can always revise them. I always need time to think. I don't process
Yeah.
immediately.
I need to be able to read it myself, which is why I started writing down, but we will have a chance to amend them at the business meeting if we decide to go forward with discussing and voting on.
And then you'll talk about how you're gonna, the accountability around it.
Yes.
We do have a couple of comments here that I want to get to. I'm just reading just to see, make sure they're on the goals. Holly Cervantes asks, that's really great, important to learn what works from different regions and to have input from your community. I heard you say it is a higher level to determine how to set your direction. I'm curious how to know if you prioritize parental feedback for their own children's needs, currently enrolled children, over feedback from the regional community or even alumni.
At the teacher level.
At the teacher level, yes. I think in the classroom level, we absolutely have to prioritize what what family members say about, what guardians say about their student.
Well, and for some of what, when we are receiving feedback, we absolutely do listen to it and we do appreciate it. We also look at, do they actively have students in the school? And is, not that their opinion is not as valid, so those are things that we look at in terms of what do our students need? Because, absolutely, we want collaboration with the other districts, and there's a huge amount of collaboration that occurs. But the other districts that are not our lane, and the students that attend other districts are not our lane is our students.
So just periodic reminder, projection.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And it's like the first time in my life I've been told to speak loud.
Well, I just want to encourage you to do your best self. That's really patronizing, I apologize. It wasn't
I
intended
am
that.
my best self.
I just want to share that prior to joining the board, my experience as a parent in the district was that my sense of being heard, responded to, and having my needs addressed by teachers, administrators, principals, and the superintendent grew over the past, I've had my students enrolled here since 2014. So over the last 7 years, my feeling of being heard and having my needs addressed on behalf of my students in the district has significantly grown. And so I want to thank those of you who were in service here before me, which is every single one of you, for being part of that culture of evolving a district that is responsive to and collaborative with parents.
Well, I think looking at that transformative learning piece, not knowing what we don't know. I came into being a parent having been an educator and still working in education and nonprofit education. And so I know the language to speak. And so I know the words I have the vocabulary, and that was a privilege. And so one of the things I learned as I was working, I used to work with Readiness Learn, I have some of those folks in the audience tonight, hello. One of the things I learned is that not everybody has that. And some people even have fears around school because maybe they had an educational experience that wasn't as robust as mine. And so I think part of the learning and engagement we could do this year, bringing this back to goals, is really hearing that. Like, what can we do, not just to do general communication, but to really hear the folks who haven't been heard and who feel ignored and who feel or feel nervous about emoting or communicating. And just doing some real work around that so that our ears are open to all voices.
Thanks.
We do have one more here, Kenny Bauman from Freeland. I like a lot of these goals. I'm wondering how y'all will maintain that they are actionable, and that these are mechanisms for accountability. Will that be the next step after these are finalized? I would say yes, and. I would say that yes, that will be the next step, is figuring out how we can go forward with this, but also whenever we make policy, we'll want to be looking back at these goals. Whenever we make decisions that aren't policy, we'll want to be looking back at these goals to make sure that we're actually doing what we say we want to do.
That was a cycle.
I think what she's asking is it measurable?
Yeah.
Because to be a true goal, it needs to be measurable. I think that's what she's asking.
Well, and that is something that is more difficult at the board level. I absolutely agree with that. And we'll have to look and see if there are ways that we can measure. These are, make them more measurable.
Well, I think the learning walks, that would be measurable. You can
Yeah.
measure how many times you went, you can look at what were your indicators, what was the conversation, what did you walk away with? The restorative conversations and like conversations with the community, that's measurable. You can look at how many opportunities did people have to feedback, how many emails did you respond to, right? Those would be measurements for those pieces. Around the collaboration, I think that would likely be internal accountability. So for example, there was a conversation about whether or not board members could collaborate on, policy projects or things like that. Well, if I'm on a project with Ann and I don't show up, it's an internal accountability for Ann to say, hey, Ann, you're not showing up.
We're taking care of
Yeah, so I think that it is very important for us to keep in mind accountability as we're looking at this. And a lot of it as you say, internal. It's we keep each other accountable for doing these things. And also, we have to listen to the community when they don't think we're fulfilling our goals.
Yeah. And I think, it would be great to have a time during a meeting when we actually discuss what kind of a commitment can each of us make to showing up in these ways and within the constraints of all the things we're balancing in our lives. What kind of cadence of engagement can we each commit to deepen our ability to connect and learn in our community?
It's almost 8
Yeah.
o'clock and we're halfway through our agenda.
Yep, that's just where I was going. It seems like we are comfortable with these. We've got 2 comments here, and then we're going to move on to the next item.
I wanted to follow up, I didn't want to get off too much earlier. Andrea, earlier you had said, you referenced a law about the punishment thing, and when you referenced individual, which mom of 7, I get it completely. But as of 2 days ago, on the Washington site, RCW 28A320-128 says a person who, and I'm paraphrasing, knowingly makes a false notification of a threat under the section is guilty of a misdemeanor, punishable under another RCW. How does that, I'd like to know what law that was that you referenced, because that's very contradictory to
All
this.
educational policy laws are under WACS and RCW's 161A. So that would be the educational laws that you would reference.
Opposed to
And
criminal law.
I'm gonna again
Losing
bring us,
education.
I'm
on
gonna
education
again
side.
bring us back to board comments, if you wanna email me. so that
That's
have
fine.
your-
I just wanted to ask what if you knew the RCW. That's all. I didn't want to have a conversation about it.
Okay, well,
Thank you.
I could definitely explain more in depth, if
Okay.
you would like to email me, so I
I'm
have
happy
your
to do that.
contact information.
And that's a great example of how I'd love to see that happen in general, is if there's something that we need more in depth about that we don't have off the top of our head. Thank you for being willing to reach out and email, and thank you, Andrea, for volunteering for this one.
Absolutely. Wendy?
Wendy?
So something I really suggested, the superintendent, because sometimes people come to meetings and not think that there's much going on because they may not attend some of the committees that the school board has or school district has. And I have made the recommendation that maybe there be a report, just to know that there are committees meeting in regards to different areas in the school. One of them being SET Ed, one of them being education, one being communication, there's multiple committees. But if we don't hear a report at either the workshop or the board meeting, we don't know that any inner workings of communication and collaboratory time is happening. And I think that'd be a benefit for people to know when the meetings happen, which, during COVID, there was a time they didn't happen. But it's just another avenue for people to know that people are meeting and being collaborative and communicating the needs of their students or their children and within the district. And it'd be great to hear a report. Any other organizations I'm a part of, whether board member or just the community at large, they give a simple report on these committees that meet outside of these actual meetings and workshops. And it's just another avenue for people to be aware of ongoing and again, being transparent and visible to the community.
I think that's a fantastic way for us to engage and communicate better in order to understand the problems before us and share our understanding of that with the community. Thank you. To bring it back to board goals. One more thing. on
Thank you,
board
Brooke.
goals.
Chair Wilford. So right to that point exactly, it's brought something up. So I went on website a little bit, didn't do all the deep dive to find out. I was looking for previous meetings, meeting minutes and all that. Couldn't find it there. Maybe it's just that I didn't look long enough. So I would, right on this line, I would really like to see this board, approve minutes as fast as possible, not wait to, so you can do the process through online, have them listed so everybody can keep up to
They are,
speed.
sir.
So we approve
They are.
minutes at every business meeting for the past business meeting and board workshop and anything else that came in between. So that's once a month we do that. So if you want to look at minutes for past meetings, you can look at the business meetings. And part of the consent, right before the consent agenda actually is approving board minutes for the past. events.
But the fact is that the Christie posts basically the next day, the recording.
Okay.
And then the minutes, once they're approved, are posted as Brooke said.
And actually, the draft of the minutes come on.
Immediately.
Okay.
Like I do at the same time. And
So
you're
if
not
you
looking
go to our
for-
website on the homepage, it says board. And if you click, it'll say minutes and meetings and agendas and policy. And you click on that, it takes you to board docs and you can get all of that information.
So one little quick thing here also with the operational budget that you deal with, it'd be really nice that if you had staff here, that we had a projector so we could see what you're all looking at right now as even as the document evolves.
We typically do, it's usually projected right over there,
Right.
with COVID and.
The only thing they're looking at is the agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's,
There's no
we're just scanning
No
through
presentation.
agenda and policies. I actually looked in the agenda of the past meeting to get the superintendent goals.
And what I'm doing right now is looking at all of the spam comments and I'm just deleting them. That's all I'm doing right now.
So
SpongeBob is active.
the last thing that,
Sorry.
on board meeting, and this is a good wrap up before we move on to the next point, is follow-up note, Kenny Bauman from Freeland. Yes, I'm curious how these goals will be attached to real objectives. I hope that these goals are posted with a commitment to action via objectives. Thank you for this work. That's certainly our intention to get them posted and to see how we can. I think setting these goals is a commitment amongst ourselves that we will hold each other accountable for. We do need to find some metrics to measure them.
Absolutely.
And I think it'd be great to share with our community what those measurable
Yep.
objectives are.
Yeah, once we do that. Yep. Okay, let's move on to the next point on the agenda, which is civilian policy. We've had some conversations about how to best handle board meetings in this environment where we are both on Zoom and in public, and how to make sure that we keep keep to what we have in policy 1400 about uncivil comments, and whether we want to make an update to that policy or whether we want to add another policy. Andrea, you had mentioned something that I think it was Lake Washington School District had about a civility policy about communications both to and from the school and members of the school district.
Well, and I think it's larger than just a board conversation. So oftentimes, in my experience in districts on the I-5 corridor, you will see civility policies in place, and they are actually most utilized by teaching staff. And so if a teacher feels that because teachers are professionals and this is their professional work, education is a little bit different in that we are working with people's children, and that's their most valuable possession that they have. Sometimes people will respond or react to school professionals in a way that is unprofessional, and the school professionals being professional can't necessarily respond back unprofessionally, right? So civility policies and clauses can be enacted in meetings that are becoming hostile, or in meetings that are creating personal attacks against any staff member within the district. And part of what came up in discussion was whether or not we wanted to consider something along those lines, that teachers, paras, custodial workers, administrators, anybody would have access to reference to should they feel they need to.
So the scenario that would be supported by this policy
I
would be.
can give an example
Yeah, would
of
you?
a time I pulled one in. I was leading an IEP meeting for a student, and the guardian was becoming increasingly frustrated because they wanted a specific level of support to be provided, and we didn't have data. It wasn't a consensus on the IEP. So the guardian made a decision to use very profane language towards the teachers and the staff. And I gave a warning and said, if we engage in that language, we will end the meeting and we will not continue in this format. We will go to mediation. And the parent chose to continue with the language. And so I ended the meeting and excused the members from the table, and we met again in mediation. And we were able to have a really collaborative conversation. And we were, after mediation, we were able to come back into a room together and work well together without inappropriate language.
But it was the policy
It was the policy that
made you feel empowered to say, this meeting is adjourned.
Yep. And another example was when I was teaching in the classroom. I had given a student a grade based on a standards-based grading piece. The parent felt the grade was too high, and so they made a decision to send me some emails that were very personal and attacking, questioning in my integrity as a teacher. And my principal read the email and stepped in and was able to tell the parents that they were no longer allowed to email me. And so for the remainder of that student's year in my classroom, the parent had to communicate with the principal to talk to me based on that policy.
And so the idea is to make things a little, give staff something to fall back on to back them up, so they are less stressed, so they are less, so they can focus on teaching our students.
Well, and it really comes down to just being able to focus on working with that student and being able to not let the noise impact how you're working with that student, and really the students benefit the most from those policies, because they can't control oftentimes what's happening in meetings or what's happening in email exchanges, and they just want to come to school.
So I need a point of clarification, because the agenda here says South River School District Policy 1400. When you click on the link, it takes you to all the policies. So do we have a model policy that you're trying to refer to that we could point out, read, because it doesn't sound like you're focused on
Yes.
policy
So
1400.
from our last retreat, the model policy that we sent out was in Washington, so that should be.
That was emailed to each of us. And
Okay, well, the agenda threw me out because I'm only reading 1400.
so,
So I'm way behind now on that.
So my
We don't
intention
have
with that was just to ask if this was the right place to put that policy, or if we should have a separate policy, or if we should have this change at all. During one of our leadership meetings, we just, actually Marty was there as well, we were just debating whether or not we needed a change, whether this would be effective, whether this would be efficient, so we wanted to bring it up for discussion here at a workshop where we could talk about it.
I think it's a good idea to examine the container, so, because a policy, policy 1400, everyone can access it, everyone knows that it's there, anyone can utilize it. But sometimes having a guide that feels more attainable, and is formal, of course, and has parameters, but isn't kind of tucked in all the other stuff, can feel more accessible. Like I can pull this off the shelf and use it as a tool, and as a model for how not only I conduct myself in my classroom, but also how I expect my kids to connect themselves. How I expect anyone who walks in my classroom to connect themselves. And so we kind of make a human pact in that moment to be civil with one another. And I think that's a very accessible way to do it.
Has it been reviewed by WASDA and/or WASDA attorneys for?
It's a WASDA policy.
Yeah,
It is a
can I
WASDA policy.
interject? I've got a couple messages for friends who are watching on Zoom and they can't hear you.
Okay.
Can you guys all project towards, I'm assuming that's where the microphone is. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Thank you.
I'm having a hard time hearing you on Zoom.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, we'll have to speak up a little bit louder.
Yes.
Um,
Again, for some of these things, I think to Ann's point, it's the idea of taking what you already have in policy and putting it in one place. Because you have a policy on professional conduct, you have a policy on civil discourse. We referenced 1400 because it was about civil discourse as opposed to uncivil discourse. So the idea of workshopping it was to talk about whether or not you wanted to call it into one place, right? Because students have a code of conduct, staff have a code of conduct. Our community relations, there is a code of conduct.
And I appreciate all that, but I guess maybe I'm speaking on behalf of everybody here too. When they go to look at our agenda and that's what they see, then they're seeing what I'm looking at,
Right.
So
Right,
I'm
and
behind
it
the
is
eight ball.
policy, well, no, you're not behind the eight ball, it is policy 1400, because that is about civil discourse, so that's the conversation, you're not anywhere behind. I mean, it was, the email of the Washington one was sent, the Lake Washington one was sent to the board also.
Right, no, I saw that, but.
But that's the
this
idea of the
was- okay.
conversation, and that's what Brooke put in his leadership email, is that this would be the conversation.
And I don't foresee us hammering out a policy here and now. I think that the discussion
The
that
idea
I want to
you
have.
want it.
Yeah,
Sure.
exactly.
Right, and to that point, I think the value in this is it provides a really clear standard that each person engaging in conversation can be held to. So as a, whether it's a parent or a staff member or a student or a board member, we each can be called into our better selves by the existence of this policy when and if a meeting becomes uncivil to the point where it's not a safe conversation anymore, and it's not going to be generative. So to provide, especially our staff, that kind of backstop, of being able to point to the policy as the pause button on that conversation when it gets to the point where it's more harmful than generative, I think it's a wonderful idea to bring it into one clear, concise policy that's more accessible.
And again, you have policy 4200, that's also about the conduct of staff and community, and it's, I think it was all about drawing it into one place and making
Yeah.
it.
How can we make it really accessible, really
Right.
clear, that anyone can, again, pull it off the shelf as a tool and use it?
So-
I
so-
wonder,
go ahead.
are you looking for proposed next steps from board members or looking for?
I was hoping that we could just decide if we wanted to do something about it first. And it sounds like that if we can get it in proper WASDA terminology, that this does seem like something that would be useful.
I think I'm open to it. I think we still have a question of whether or not it's needed.
Right.
Because it came up in conversation of just in general at the retreat.
Mhm.
But I don't know if teachers feel like they need this. I don't
Well,
know
and
if
we
the
have-
principals feel like they need it.
Exactly. We have not, we've been able to rely on that policy. I think, you know, it's something I can investigate as we get into the school year if we want more information. Staff is present now, right? But it's not something we've heard a lot about. It's just the idea that, you know, it's really important to be respectful and to know that you are backed by policy. If it gets disrespectful.
So maybe it's something where we say, let's table this for now and look at if the staff, and I'd like to go beyond certificated instructional staff.
Right.
And look at all this stuff, if staff feel that this is something that would be helpful for them. Because I do want to make sure that we're not over policy, that we're not
Absolutely.
fixing problems that don't
That
exist.
don't exist, yeah. True,
So is that, okay.
thank you.
I do have several, we do have several comments on here that are not addressing anything on the agenda. So I'm not going to read them because that's what these discussions are about. So if there's anything else that anyone would like to say on this policy, Wendy, you had your hand up first.
Well, I was just gonna say, you don't want to start policing policy, and there's different times in which policy becomes important. It's whether someone in attendance were to attack a board member, and like you said, there's a policy in place, and I hope that it's followed. If a board member were to attack another board member, I'm sure there's policies for board members to be respectful of each other, and if a student or another adult or a caregiver or a guardian were to attack a teacher, there's policy there. There's also a law, because you guys are public servants. So, you know, you have that fallback if it gets to that severity. But you don't really want to start policing the policy. You just have to follow it. That's the biggest thing. And let people know, like you did with the rush, this is a policy number, and we're gonna, you know, try to follow it. And I think that's more important than policing policy, just enforcing it and doing it so people can see that, and by actions, that it's there.
Katya Williford Langley. Because I was curious, I did look up the Lake Washington one. I think some of the benefits that I'm seeing here that the board may want to consider is there's a lot of really clear definitions that I think the board is currently lacking in their policy about what is civil, what is uncivil. And also it talks a lot more of, it's a little bit broader in terms of it really addresses different activities, that it isn't just it's all about school-sponsored activities as well. So it feels a little bit more like it umbrellas a lot of things that I think currently the policy that the South Whitby has is missing. As an educator, I would feel very comfortable with this policy that Lake Washington School District has, because it gives me a sense of what I can expect as a teacher, talking with parents, talking even with my supervisors, that sort of thing. So just in looking at it, I think that it would be worth considering adding some of their language.
And did you have a comment on this agenda item?
Specifically, yes, on governance. And of course, you're getting down the right road as far as I'm concerned. Because it needs to be piecemealed out. This is not one fell swoop. You know, you need to go in depth on it, you know, be comfortable with technical writing, also be contacting legal to make sure. I mean, if you're going to amend or institute additional governance, you know, by all means, it's a lengthy process, because you don't want to make something maybe that you see as challenging, making it worse.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And having Andrea on the board is immensely helpful for this, because that's her job. Educational policy is her job, and having her on the board has been of immeasurable help in making sure that our policies are proper, legal, and useful.
Well, we also have Christie's support on the development of the legal side, and we also run it through our attorneys as well. So there's multiple layers.
And we draw most things straight from law and then adjust as needed.
And to be in law with district bylaws and state laws.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next point, agenda item, which is Dr. Campbell's training. Yeah.
Yes,
That was
it really
fun.
was.
So what we did in our training earlier today was the board and administrative teams sat down and had a conversation, a presentation conversation with Dr. Tammy Campbell, who is an expert who is the Federal Way Public Schools Superintendent in Residence, transitioning from that position, from the superintendent position to a consulting position, and is an expert in finding the places where a school district is not providing the best education possible to students. Whether it's a specific demographic of students, whether it's all the students, places where the districts are failing and providing
Opportunities for growth.
opportunities for growth. And finding the equitable solutions that give voices, that give buy-in, that Marty, you had a way of defining equity that was particularly.
I'm not sure which definition you're referring to, but what I really appreciated about today's presentation was that she approached the subject matter as the question of how can we ensure that every student feels a sense of belonging, and from that sense of belonging can have voice, can have success, can have academic achievement, can have high scholarship. And so it's really about lifting all boats.
Well, and there is a huge focus on academic rigor and what does our academic data say about the work that we are doing, which I think is really in alignment with what the community is asking about like what are you doing in the academic areas? And that was really what Dr. Campbell was looking at, is these are the data sets that you look at, and this is how you target it. So as Marty said, it's for everyone.
And what I saw in the data she shared from Federal Way was this extraordinary growth in graduation rates, in postgraduate success, in testing, in literacy, and across all demographics. Students in every, we saw a very limited number of spreadsheets, but in every bar graph we saw, all of the students were uplifted in their academic success by the work of threading equity through all of the ways of being as a school and as a leadership team.
And I think for me as an educator, testament to that is, it's numbers, people feel like you can manipulate those, right? You can make them say what you want to say, but the students' achievement on AP and IB and their not just enrolling in post-secondary school, but remaining in and continuing through. That's data that the schools do not necessarily have. They wouldn't generate that. That's generated from external sources, and those numbers were really what stood out to me.
And I was pretty struck by the sense of belonging that students and families were feeling. The connection that their district, their huge, diverse district was able to attain. It was aspirational.
Yeah, my mom worked at Federal Way School District, and really what she would share, because she spent about 26 years in the public school district, and then went and worked for JBL Improvement, and then came back to Federal Way. And she said it was night and day, and it was really that sense of belonging. She said that the connectedness that students felt really generated just this culture of respect across the buildings. And so, I know anecdotally that it's very much alive and present at the building.
Well, it really fits with the work we've started to do, and it takes us to the next level. But the 4 B's, as she called them, was belonging and the basics, and just giving students basically what they need.
So the 4 B's, I took the notes because
Yeah.
these really struck me, were create a deep sense of belonging. And that was making students feel like they have a place and a voice and that they belong in the school. And then demonstrating belief in the limitless potential for every scholar. So showing that you think that everyone can succeed towards their chosen goal. Removal of barriers, which we talked about earlier, and then broadcasting scholar voice. So not just listening, but seeking out and raising the voices of the students and the scholars.
If you pay any attention to our students because they're our clients, they're the people we're serving, they are our audience. Just really, I loved the idea of exploring how do we give our youngest learners voice. You know, whether it's through student-led conference or all of those activities, and their activities, but the idea that we value the voices of our students.
I really appreciated the alignment across the district. Because that felt really powerful and important to me, you know, as having been in the classroom many minutes ago, but it happened. And being handed the new folder with the new thing that you're supposed to do this week, this this year or whatever, that's on top of the 14 other folders that you've already been doing. And then all the other things that teachers are asked to do during the day. And then still love and care for each student. This isn't that. It's not a here's your booklet, here's what you do, here's the 15 minutes you spend on it. It's this absolute alignment of, you know, skills and expectations so that the whole district, you may pilot a program in one school or another and then grow it. But every staff member is held to the same expectations. Every child is offered the same amount of voice. Every, you know, it's very much an alignment of belonging. So it's not just the kiddos who feel like they belong, the families should feel like they belong in the building. The teachers feel like they belong in the building and are supported. Administrators and board members can feel like they belong in the building. And I really was struck by that and how powerful that is, because we already have such a powerful community and so many resources for that. And so building on what we have and the skill sets we already have as a district and a community feels really cool and powerful to me.
Are there any questions here about it?
Is there comments of that or kind of around?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
As long as they're related to this.
Right. Okay. I would just like to thank you guys for continuing this work, especially in our district of like limited diversity. I feel like it's very important for you guys to continue to explore ways you can make the district work more for everyone. So I really appreciate it. I think since you started this work, I've felt more of a sense of belonging. We're not person yet, but we'll get there. So I'm very hopeful of where you guys are going, and I really thank you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackson.
And if I can respond briefly to that, you know, as a person of Scottish heritage, I have a worldview that's informed by my background of European descent and my experience as a cisgendered white woman in America. And my life experience and what I can do and see and learn is going to be broader and more rich and more supportive of my thriving if I am in a community where I see multiple perspectives. And so I think the fact that this is a predominantly white community doesn't mean that we should focus less on ensuring that diverse voices are present, but rather that diverse voices are in our community. There are diverse voices here. I think we probably have a number of different backgrounds and identities informing how each of us in this room shows up. And when we can create the safety that each of us can come forward as a whole person that does belong and is welcomed and does feel safe, then all of us have a richer experience.
Thank you.
Well, I was really struck by the emphasis on threading all of this work in with regular lessons, regular plans, regular days. I'm gonna toot my own horn here a little bit.
What was the fruit analogy?
Yep. That's just what I was thinking. It's not like the teachers already have a plum and you're handing them an apricot. It's you're making both of them into a plum. So you get the apricot, you get the plum, but it's all in one.
It's not, we're not adding another layer as Anne described it in her past. We're making it the thread of everything we do is to make sure that we are removing systemic barriers for all of our students so they all feel a sense of belonging. They all feel that we're meeting them where they are and taking them forward.
I see a couple of hands. I want to get to one that's been sitting here for a while, from Holly Cervantes. What metric will be used when you use the term equity, which is very different than equality, to determine success in your goals this coming year? How often will you communicate results? How frequently will connections with parents be made, parents or guardians be made? Well, I think that's something.
Our next step.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want, one thing that we've always gone back to is when looking at equity rather as opposed to equality is anyone who's had brothers or sisters, anyone who's had siblings or has had two kids knows that every person needs a slightly different approach. And giving them all the same approach is never going to be what is best for any of them.
Well, you're not gonna get the same result,
Right.
right? Like you can even just take it off the table and say what's best for them,
Right.
right? If you have older child, younger child, and you treat them exactly the same, exact same consequences, exact same rule, you will have two children who respond completely different to that environment. And so it's not even necessarily if it's what's best or whatever, right? Because
Right.
both could turn out completely capable members
Right.
of society. But it's, if you had shifted one way, great example. My mom used to punish me by sending me to my room.
Mine too.
My room held an entire library of books. I was perfectly happy. Right? If she had just taken my books away, I would have stopped doing a lot of stuff. Like,
This sounds very familiar.
it was the
Yes.
worst thing she could have done to my sister. Was send her to her room.
So I have one more here and then I'll get to the questions and I know that there are several here. AJ Telly from Oak Harbor. I would like to know what you plan to do to make all kids feel like they belong here without being singled out by skin color or religious or political beliefs. And I've got a very similar question from Kat Thomas in Oak Harbor. In order to make each individual feel welcome and have a richer experience, the teachers, staff, board members need to quit singling out minority groups. I think that what Marty was saying, I think what Marty was saying about getting the richer experience for everyone, when you not necessarily single someone out, but recognize the differences and celebrate the differences that everyone has.
Well, and I think also whether or not a BIPOC person is a minority group is largely influenced by the perspective and culture that you come from. Because if you were to shift a continent, or if you were to shift to a different region of our country, that would not be a true statement.
I believe it, in fact, Federal Way was one of those that.
It's the most diverse district in the state.
and fifth
117 languages.
most- And fifth most diverse in the country.
And,
Yeah.
you know, just an additional level on that, I would say that when the education that was designed after the Industrial Revolution in Europe and then manifested here in the United States, which is largely the roots of the education that we're working in now, that was designed for a particular subset of the global population, for a particular moment in history, for a particular need of society in that moment. And we do live in times when the needs that our students face as they move out into their adult lives in the world are going to be different than the needs of a student seeking work in 1920, for instance. So I just think that curricula that reflects the diversity that is present in America and materials and approaches to education in which every student can see some aspect of themselves reflected are going to resource all of our students better for the world that they're moving into as independent adults with the capabilities that were pointed to by one of our audience members.
Reflected and represented and not just organized.
Right.
I think is the most important thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that as we look at curriculum, for example, the idea that we're gonna look at curriculum that encompasses the entire history of America, that has people in it who look like the people using the materials, I think that those are rich experiences that I would want to see someone like me, right? That's how we get a sense of belonging for our students, is that they feel connected to their school, regardless of any of the characteristics they bring, but being honored for the characteristics that they bring. We all bring characteristics to it. I wouldn't want to have mine ignored. That wouldn't make me feel like I belong. That would make me feel like I didn't count. And I think that's really what we're going for, is for making sure that our students feel like they belong. Yes.
Maureen, I think you had your hand up
That's
first.
it. saw something posted today, and I think it's definitely pertains to this, and this lady's name is Sarah Kirkconnell, and she wrote something today I saw on a post that said, I won't read the whole thing because it's very long, but I think it's important to hear her words because this is specifically talking about the meeting today. She said that after sitting through a chunk of the school board retreat that's being live streamed, I won't read it verbatim either, that she had one very angry question. Why don't you ask what we want? Why do you assume what we want? And she went on to say that in another meeting, Dr. Joseph, the South End needed more affordable housing because POC, people of color, couldn't afford to live here.
That's not what I said, and
I'm just reading her letter. I'm just reading it. Anyway, that's the most patronizing thing a white person can say, that we can't afford to live here. The white savior mentality, that's what the real issue is. I can't believe, I'll just go on and forget that part. That's how racist, because I'm a minority, I should be poor begging for help. I'll continue on. This is long, and I'll just get to the main point here. That's really, I think, speaks to this. I am so defeated with the attitude of the school district in the past 2 short years. We went from something wonderful where I felt welcome to where I don't feel as I nor my children are welcome. Quit dividing us by race and get back to teaching. I'm tired of my children being told they're horrible because they are cisgender males who pass for white. And maybe, just maybe, ask us what we want. Quit speaking for us. You know who is a POC due to the surveys you sent out. It's exactly why a seat was found last spring for one of my children, when before my race came up, none were there for him. In the language of my people, it's Filipino, and I won't be able to say this well, so, and Ashkenazi Jewish, and she has Hebrew in there. As both my children are, who both attend Southby School District, I have lost all hope in you. Having said that, I'm so close to taking them to Coopville, where the board and the superintendent are far from moderate. Anything, including driving 17 miles each way, is better than the current. And I just wanted to read that because so many times people think that, it's been said here last time, we're all living in little bubbles, and most of us haven't been living in a little bubble. Most of us are from everywhere with all kinds of problems, sexual abuses, different backgrounds, including Sarah. And she's right, in my opinion. It's good to talk about how to be kinder and how to help each other, but we're not listening to everybody.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I would say that we have identified one of the things we want to do is find out how we better listen to people.
And I also think we've heard from a large amount of the community who are asking us to do this work.
I didn't,
And
I don't know what you said.
What?
One more time, sorry.
I'm here, we have also heard from a large amount of the community who are asking us to do this work and who are saying that their children are feeling a sense of belonging. We have students here saying that they feel a sense of belonging because of the work.
Not everybody will though. Not everybody will.
Everybody
Excuse me.
Sorry.
I also
recognize
want
that it's not gonna meet everybody's need.
But do you
But I
have
think-
actual numbers? I mean, do you know if the majority of people feel one way or another? Do you know if you're representing?
Not off the top
community?
of my head, but I think that we could definitely pull up some of our previous board
Well,
minutes.
what
that
we
have
know
quantifiable-
is that all of our students deserve a sense of belonging. All of our students deserve that. We do not call students out by the color of their skin. Why it says that is beyond me. Because what we are doing is removing systemic barriers for all of our children.
Yeah.
And so that's the work we're doing, is creating a situation where our students feel a sense of belonging. And that's the customer that we are working with. And they're here, and they're present, and they're engaged. And I think that demonstrates that they're actually living the board's vision and mission, because they are actively engaged in their community. How could we not appreciate what they have to say?
Well, and I also want to emphasize that Dr. Campbell's drive in this is not racial. It's looking
At
at
all.
every possible demographic to see where we're failing students, where we can do better for students. So we can take the systemic barriers out for whoever they are, whether it's white cisgendered male students,
Excuse me,
whether
that's
it's.
racial. If
It
you're
is.
saying white, you're looking at the color of their skin.
Can-
So it is racial.
Can I continue? Whether they're students experiencing homelessness, whether they're LGBTQIA students, what,
Students who receive special education, which accounts for 17% of our students. We have foster students who, students experiencing homelessness is 20% of our student population. Our foster students are also high, but they get captured under the homeless. I don't have the specific number for that. And our ELL population, our sample size is so small that it doesn't register for state data. But those would be categorical areas that we know our students are not meeting standard, which is what Dr. Campbell is asking us to look at. It's not just our racial demographics, but also our categorical areas.
looking at any possible demographics we can to find students who are not being served as well as they could.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that we had, I think Katya, you were next.
Yes, Katya Wilford Langley. I know you want me to say that every time. I'm gonna say it anyways. So a couple things. So I've heard a lot of excitement from the board about this training. Does the board intend to start having this cascade downward? Will Dr.
Admin was
Campbell be
there.
coming back for admin and
Admin was there today.
Oh,
with the
admin
board.
was.
It was a collective training, and we will be meeting with Dr. Campbell 3 more times over the course of the year.
2 more, I think.
2 or 3 more, but we have work to do in between. This was sort of setting the groundwork, and it's really the district's work around looking at our demographics, exploring what the barriers actually are for our students here in the district, and then systematically working to remove them. So it's about studying our own performance and then addressing those areas. For example, how are our homeless students who are experiencing homelessness, how are they doing compared to the majority of students? How are our students who identify as other than white, how are they doing as an individual demographics? How are our students who are experiencing poverty doing? And what does that look like? So that is where the work is. It is not about calling out students, but it is about embracing all of our students for the characteristics that they bring to the table. So we are not colorblind, but we are looking at students and saying, this is your culture, this is my culture. How are we alike? What are our experiences that are different? It's about the collective. It's not about calling out any one or another or identifying and ranking. I mean, it's not any of that. It's really about.
So one of the pieces that you and Dr. Campbell both had in common today that speaks to equity is not really seeing or knowing how many kids didn't have access to Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
And COVID became the measure or the guide for seeing who could get online and who could do their work. And so it was this huge choice.
Again, it was a systemic
Yes.
barrier that we had to help our students overcome. So we
Yes.
gave everybody a Chromebook. We
Yes.
made sure that those who didn't have access to Wi-Fi had access to Wi-Fi.
Yes.
We have an amazing Readiness to Learn program. They did all of the outreach to make that possible. And so that is an equity issue. That has nothing to do with anything except equity. But I'd like to be really clear because I do feel defensive about a particular comment that was made, and I want to be clear. What I said, and I'll say it again, is that we have people that we hired in our district. And regardless of anything, they had a very difficult time locating affordable housing, locating housing at all. So as a district, we helped those folks. That happened to be in the same conversation when I was asked about recruiting and whether or not we were reaching out to try and recruit individuals from the BIPOC population. And somehow that got conflated and the two were totally separate. So I just want to be really clear on that. We know as a community, we'd be kidding ourselves if we thought that there's affordable housing here for people who need affordable housing. People, it's in the newspaper, it's at each of the community council, like the Langley Council. we're trying to make affordable housing for people. And we have people who can afford very expensive housing, and then those people who can't live here. And so that is a systemic issue that we all grapple with. That's not a school district issue. So anyway.
I would say according to Zillow report, I can't afford my own.
So I saw
I just have a-
3 questions. You've got a follow-up.
I have a follow-up real fast. So I was just thinking, so it sounds like, just trying to come back, so it sounds like you're keeping this mostly up at the board level, and then we'll bring it down towards the educators.
Well,
in
it'll
the district
impact,
as well.
I mean, the superintendent's goals will impact all of the staff. The
Right.
work with Dr. Campbell will impact all the staff. We're doing equity training with staff, but the data dive, that will definitely come down to the staff and the teacher level goals, but we're not there yet.
Well, and I think it's important to point out, there's been a misnomer that this is isolated in the South Whitby School District. As a teacher up in the Cookville School District, you guys are engaging in the same work we are engaging in. So this is something we're seeing across school districts. And I think what you guys are doing is great, because it's also what I'm experiencing as an educator up north as well.
So Pratia, what I would actually say is that the work is starting at the student level and then backwards planning up to the board level. So it would be, in terms of touch points, it would be student, teachers, administrators, central office, board.
And that's great. Perfect.
Because we always want to make sure that we're keeping the student experience centered there.
Correct.
Wonderful.
Speaking of which, I think you were next.
So on the topic of equity, something that I would really like to see like in schools is some more non-binary representation and like education on non-binary people, because as a non-binary person myself, it's like, that's somewhere where I feel like very excluded, because things get so like divided by gender, like male, female, and you know, it's not as talked about that there's people outside of that, and like, I know it's not a big thing, but like, I would really appreciate some more recognition on that part.
And that's certainly one of the areas in which we're going to be looking at, we started our efforts with combing through policy to change our gendered language to non-gendered language. We've started with making some of our single-use bathroom or single occupant bathrooms non-specific. I hear you very much. That's something that's very important to you and other
And
students.
with the curriculum adoptions and with inclusive history, that would include voices of all people. And I think especially in Native American culture, right, non-binary people had a very large role in that culture.
Yeah, because it isn't a new thing, it's.
Right. There are
Yeah.
globally cultures, age-old cultures for as far back as humans have records of non-binary gender identities that are deeply woven into every aspect of community life. So I think there was an interruption to that story being part of mainstream culture in America for a while, but it's absolutely valid and integral to the human experience.
I think that speaks to teaching the whole story, so everyone feels belonging, and feels like their story is included in some way, and their history matters.
And I'm going to go back to questions here, and I want to remind folks that we want to keep this focused on these efforts that are based on Dr. Campbell's training that we went to today, and questions about that, and I believe that you had your hand up.
Speaking of comfort, we talk about have race groups and other groups. What about belief groups? If you hung a Christian flag, that would be offensive to some people. If you hung a Muslim flag, that would be offensive to some people. If you hung the Star of David, that'd be offensive to some people. Well, for those of us who are Orthodox believers, we find the pride stuff is offensive. It is a religious system, and it should not be in the schools.
So the banners that.
The banners shouldn't be there.
Well, appreciate your opinion. The banners that are hung are a direct result of our associated student body, student leaders. And the students have the opportunity to express themselves.
What about the Christians?
The Christian students, if they formed a group and wanted to express themselves through ASB, then that would be a
And is
matter.
it true that you guys kicked on Young Life off campus a few years ago?
No.
Okay, because I heard Young Life was restricted and the staff was not allowed.
But this is off topic.
Yeah,
No, this is comfort.
No, it's.
This is about making belonging, and if people of faith are not allowed to belong if their faith is not.
We don't want to mock anyone's belief system as
Well,
long as
if
it
you
does
hang
not
the
harm
pride
anyone.
flag, you are.
I don't want to, I think this is going to get off topic, so I'm going to ask those who are commenting on this topic to please step back. And I understand that there are some people who very much want to comment on this, and I appreciate the passion both from you and from those who want to respond.
Send us your feedback by email.
I think Wendy's hand has been up for a
Yep.
while, and she may have a.
She's the next one I was going to go to.
Thank you.
So when we're talking about barriers.
We can speak up some, yeah.
I'm good, Bob. It's been a long day. So when we're talking about barriers, one thing we have to keep in mind a couple meetings ago was there was a lot of comments in regards to students being fearful or not feeling safe at the school. And one of the posts I put in there, I put the crisis line, if they don't feel comfortable coming to an adult staff or police officer, whatever the systemic barriers are for them individually. I'm just wondering, follow up, since we're talking about barriers, that is a huge barrier on campus, any campus, college, intermediate school, high school, that could be a huge barrier for people, they don't feel safe. And one of my closing questions in that meeting was, what are you guys, after hearing this, the information, the comments, people were feeling unsafe or fearful for whatever reason, and I don't think it's relative to maybe one event, I think it's just occurred at any time. I'm just wondering what you guys have done since that meeting and what you're doing to put in place so that issue is not so prevalent, because that is in itself a barrier.
Yeah, students feeling safe on campus is absolutely, or feeling unsafe on campus is absolutely a barrier to learning. To some degree, we need to know the specifics so that we can address the specific issues rather than a generalized feeling uncomfortable on campus. And in that regard, we encourage families to contact the teacher first, and then the principal if the teacher is unable to handle what they're talking about. And at that point, it can then, if the principal is unable to deal with it, then it would go up to the superintendent. And if she is unable to deal with that, then it would come up to
If
us. So
it's the general culture you're talking about, when it's all about students feeling safe. That's the whole point of all the work we're doing, is to create a culture where our students feel safe on campus. And so if there are individual students who feel unsafe, then they should work through their principal. But again, we're off the topic that the board's trying to discuss.
If I can bring Wendy's comment back to the topic we're trying to discuss. I really experienced in today's meeting with Dr. Campbell that having a sense of belonging and trust with the staff in the school building is one of the ways that students can give voice to their concerns or their fears or their areas where they need an ally to help them feel safe at school or to flag a danger. And so I remember hearing, I believe it was you, Dr. Moshe, speak to the importance of ensuring that there's a trusted
It
staff
actually
member.
was Mr. Patton. That has been
Oh,
his
I'm sorry.
passion to make sure that every student has a trusted adult, and we actively engage with them to make sure that they in fact have a trusted adult in the school that they can turn to if they need someone.
Yes.
And so that has
Thank you.
been a goal that has been in our schools.
And I've seen
really,
it.
he spearheaded it. So
I've seen it impact my family, in my daughters feeling more welcome and included and connected in the school community. I've also seen it on surveys, and I've seen our student responses to that question and the trajectory towards more students feeling more, feeling a greater sense of access to a trusted adult in the schools. So I just want to acknowledge that work. Thank you.
oh, we had two hands up, and I want to make sure that we are keeping on the agenda item. So I believe that you were next. So
I'm Rufus Rose from Maxwell Road, addressing the superintendent's comment about affordable housing. I believe the board has the duty to communicate with the Island County Commissioners and their planning commission. I was on the planning commission for 10 years. The need for affordable housing is clear. It's harming the community that we do not have it. And this board has a duty to say that and make recommendations about what you need and want.
well, so
It's
that is
part of
off
the-
topic on the agenda.
But
I'm
yes,
addressing the
I
superintendent's
agree.
comment.
But I agree that, and that is something that we are engaging in communications with other groups.
And we have been.
Yeah.
And we are
May
participating.
I have a copy of your communication?
It's been verbal. There's no copy.
That doesn't mean a thing.
Okay.
Unless you put it in writing, it is not paid attention to.
Okay,
Sir,
appreciate that.
again, we are off topic on this.
I thought the superintendent's comment were what I was, well, that's what I'm addressing, is what you
It
just
was
said.
at the meeting today.
We did talk about affordable housing, and that is something that we are addressing. We have, yeah,
Again, we as a school district have been in conversation about affordable housing with the county commissioners in the past. But our
I know
mission
that.
is to educate our students. That was a comment about when we're hiring staff, it is an issue that people deal with on our island.
The point I want to make is that oral comments mean nothing. They are not on the record. You need to write to them and be specific in what you're saying. Thank you.
thank you for your comment.
Thank you for the suggestion.
Was there a question over here, or comment over here? Okay, then Libby, you're next.
Yeah, spot on here. It was on topic because it's listed in the equity as a barrier. Doctor, and you spoke about it.
Yeah.
And so I did have a question on this as far as, because you said the district has provided assistance in this housing and affordability. So I was looking at specifics, qualifiers.
So the assistance we provided was contacting anybody we could think of to say, do you have housing available? Do you know of housing available? And putting people together. So we had new people to the community. We didn't pay for anything. We simply connected them and tried to help find affordable housing that was commutable distance, which they were struggling to do because they were from out of state. So we had 3 people in that, and they couldn't find it on their own, going through the typical channels of, you know, a realtor or something like that. So we had staff to staff conversation and assisted in that.
All right, thanks.
Okay. Unless there are any other comments on Dr. Campbell's training, we'll move on to the next, which is COVID mitigation plans for the upcoming year.
So I, thank you. I sent out a communication to all of our families and to all of our staff about the fact that we will be wearing masks when we return in the fall indoors, and that there would be opportunities for students to eat lunch at school. We'll be in school full time. And there also will be opportunities for outside activity. And I received only a few questions, and the questions centered around the concern about eating lunch together and whether or not we were going to carefully look at that so that students were not at risk because they had their masks off and they were in close proximity. And the answer, in fact, is yes. And that's why I wanted to bring it here to the board. We're going to send out a follow-up communication to reassure people that our intention at all of our buildings. Of course, we know that and again, I'm speaking specifically from the perspective of what we are required to do by the governor, by OSPI, by the Washington State Department of Health. We will follow those guidelines as we have throughout the pandemic.
Not just guidelines, but
It's
regulations.
law, and it's regulation and law. So we will follow that, but
It's not law.
it is,
It
the
is.
governor's words have the impact of law on the
No,
school.
it's not legislative.
Can I finish, please? We are governed by the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. They control whether or not we get state funding. So in essence, we will lose all of our state funding if we do not comply. We will be complying because that in itself is the majority of our budget. And so we will, in fact, really create a barrier if we don't comply. So we will be complying with the governor's direction and OSPI's direction and the Washington State Department of Health. So we will be complying. It has the impact of law for a school district. If you don't believe me, that's fine, but that is what we are directed to do. So, to the board, we will be providing opportunities for students to eat lunch separated from their peers by at least 6 feet. We will have enough opportunities for them to be able to either eat outside or in a classroom. So we will create abbreviate that. We also are continuing and will continue to encourage everyone to get vaccinated. We are required to ask our staff for proof of vaccination. We know that 95% of our staff are vaccinated. We will have to ask for proof of that. We will not have volunteers in our building unless they prove vaccination. Everybody will be required again to mask. We will have COVID testing on site for symptomatic individuals. For students, should parents provide permission, testing will be available for them. We have much more rigorous criteria for athletics again. That's back in place. We'll continue with cleaning and ventilation and hand washing. But we will be in school back on our old schedule of Monday through Friday, all day long, with the exception of Wednesdays when we'll have early release. So it's not a debate.
Thank you, Dr. Moshe.
Just wanted to give you that update because we did have several community members ask about lunch and they were very concerned about it. There will be opportunities for mask breaks outside, and if students in fact are outside and at least 6 feet apart, they are allowed to take off their mask. Parents may not be comfortable with the mask being off, and students do not have to take it off. They will have the opportunity. So that's what I wanted to update you on COVID, and that we'll send out another communication regarding that fairly soon.
We mostly wanted to get it out there so that we could address not just the board, but the community on the steps being taken this coming school year, which you've already sent out the email, but the more methods of communication we can use, the better. So thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you.
No hybrid for people who want to stay home and not wear a mask.
We have an opportunity for online learning through the Spokane Virtual Academy, and we have an alternative learning program which the board approved, but those are the only options.
Wendy.
Yes, so what we were discussing earlier about private schools, one of the big luxuries of private schools is the smaller class size. We have that capability to making our class size smaller. The schedule like college is no longer utilizing the community center. We could do a satellite, just like the students were doing in this room, that they were sitting in front of computers, getting instructions through the computer. There are a lot of components that go into this and discussion if this is of interest, if people want to look into. We can really split it up between schools demographically, so some buses.
It's about staffing, Wendy. It's not about location. And we actually are going to have class sizes of about 17 or less at the elementary level for this next year, because we've maintained staff so that we can do that. And we're using the federal dollars that were provided in order to make that happen. So that's, we talked about that as a board before the school year ended about how we were going to use those federal dollars in order to hopefully really address the learning loss that's gone on over the past 18 months.
Yeah, if nothing else, just for at least through this next.
It'll be through this next school year.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so, yes, very, very much so, the smaller class sizes is something we're working on.
Well, it lowers the transmission rate and it makes parents feel more comfortable.
Absolutely.
Feel much better.
Absolutely.
Can I-
And staff also.
Can I just speak personally to Wendy as an old friend for a moment? I just want to share my personal opinion, which is I really appreciate the fact that you're bringing comments with suggestions. It feels really generative, and I just want to express my gratitude to you.
Oh, thank you. I'm trying.
Thanks.
Don't bring an issue without a solution.
Any other comments or questions on? Well, thank you again. Our last item on the agenda for the workshop is Q&A events in boardroom. This is something that we discussed at one of these leadership meetings that we have nearly weekly. And the idea was that we would take questions from the community via email, and then periodically, some portion of this leadership team would sit down and do a webcast of responses so that we could not just answer questions individually, but answer them in public. And so I wanted to get it on the agenda so we could talk about whether this is something we wanted to do. Maybe get some ideas on how we wanted to do it. Since this would be a board level function and the attention, or board and superintendent level function, so the purpose would be to answer questions at that level.
Right, and then create that FAQ and put it on the website so that it.
Can I share briefly what inspired me to bring that idea to the leadership meeting? It was a sense that we have a structure for dialogue around a specific topic with the community, like tonight. We have a structure for comment from the community during business meetings. But I was feeling a sense from our community that there's also a hunger to be able to ask questions and hear them answered in the community, in a meeting. And I realize that a lot of questions can be addressed through email, and I appreciate that as a channel, but I don't think it meets the express need of having the peers hear the answer to the question that is important to our community members as they ask it. So I just think having some of these frequent questions come to us for answering in a public forum would be of value for those who feel that they don't want to just ask and receive the answer privately. They want to ask and be experience the community's education in the form of the answer.
I think doing some like this definitely falls under the pillars of the goals that we're currently working through. I do think we, in all the goals, need to be super cognizant of our time as individuals because we are all volunteers. And we also don't want to put more on the plate of our administrators because their time is valuable as well. And so I think if we can come up with a system and a process where each of us takes part of the load, or there's, some sort of, plan put in place and calendar put in place, and we do a little backwards planning around that, I think it's really viable.
I would agree. I think it would be helpful to have the questions ahead of time so that we can prepare, because it's not that we don't have data, it's that my brain is pretty powerful, but it doesn't hold that much data.
Yeah.
The other piece that I just want to name is that just because we don't shift in the desired direction does not mean we're not listening. And I want to make sure that if we embark on this, that it's understood that it's a dialogue and it's a conversation. It is not resulting in shifts or changes. It may eventually move to that, but I think that's important to set that intention clearly from the beginning.
Yeah, and one thing that the three of us talked about was that this wouldn't be a webinar, for instance, where we have comments coming in right away.
Yeah.
It would be collecting emails throughout the month or bi-weekly or 2 weeks or quarter or whatever period we decided on, and then answering them in a burst on video.
And I would suggest a little more structure on it, as you say, to the point of resources of time and energy. That, maybe there's like a submission window where, send in your question, send a single question per community member on this date to this email. And then we might not be able to answer every question, but we would try to bring a really fair approach to answering a diversity of questions from a diversity of perspectives that touch on the most hot topics or the topics that are asked about most frequently.
And particularly if similar questions come in, we would take one of them and note that several others.
So we've had this ongoing conversation about communication for a long time. We just had the conversation a little while ago about maybe even a community forum every 90 days. Or maybe you move the community forum up and you go once every 30 days and you just broadcast it. And that is your question and answer period. You combine it into one so that you're not giving yourself an extra load.
Well, the concern there is being able to prepare the response.
But still, if it's once a month.
Well,
No, prepare, get the questions in advance. so that you
Yeah, I mean, most people still could, but there may be follow-up questions that, I'm just trying to say that, there's nothing wrong with still having that community conversation and to have it available online.
And I think that since we've seen such a great response for our Zoom meetings, that we would certainly want to take any community forum we had online.
You could do something where you say, okay, you know what, 75% of the questions we take are gonna be predetermined. So, and the other 25 we'll take from the floor, and you stick to that format, and don't take 75 from the floor and 25 from predetermined. Stick with your format or whatever, and you'll get the majority of your questions in writing beforehand.
Well, and I think that we certainly could consider that. My concern is that our ability to get accurate responses.
I understand that. My concern is that we're not overworking anybody, and that we are addressing the communication issue and taking care of it in more ways than just one.
Right.
But you can take care of it all in one setting rather than creating more settings.
Yeah, I think I'm hearing what you're saying. We talked earlier about a community forum. Now we're talking about a Q&A thing. You're saying do one, not.
And put it together.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think with this goal of restorative conversations, we're gonna see a lot of ideas about ways and channels and patterns of how to have those conversations, and channeling all those great ideas into the most effective ways to engage our community around the expressed needs that we're seeing and hearing, without it being an undue drain on your time and energy as you shape activities that lead to student learning. I just think it's great that we're having these conversations, because it's going to be finding a way through that allows maximal human energy for the most important work.
So for example, right, the audience member asked me a question about wax and RCWs, right?
I was just kind
And
of
I
referencing
was
that.
thinking, I said 161A, and then as I'm sitting here thinking, those are all special ed WACs. So the actual WAC that you would want to be looking at is chapter 392-400. That covers all of the student disciplines from 00 to 10 to 830.
But it is a perfect example.
It's a perfect example.
Getting a question answered accurately as opposed
Yeah.
to off the top of your head.
And most student RCWs for all schools and so forth are under 28 days.
Oh, good to know.
So you can go through and look at RCWs, and it'll actually break down everything as to what is found where, insurance, schools, whatever you want to know, it's broken down.
Yeah, the search on that's pretty good too.
Yeah.
May I respond to that? What you
Sure,
were just saying? What I really appreciate about that though is that you didn't say, is this exactly, please follow up with me?
Yeah.
And I appreciated that. I didn't feel like I needed a whole conversation about that. I just wanted to reference it and the fact that we could talk about it and have a dialogue and be okay with not hashing out every little point of just, here's what I was talking about, here's the correction, email me if you want more details. And I think as a community member, I'm very happy with that, because I felt like you addressed it and you were willing to follow up with me later, reach out, you know, I think that might be easier for you. And I think that you guys as a board could facilitate the way that Damien is referring, where it's 75% upfront questions with the 25% back and forth or on the spot
Or
questions.
maybe even if it's time, like we'll do, you know,
Mhm.
45 minutes of prepared questions,
Mhm.
And then we have
15 minutes of from
We
the
open the
floor,
floor.
or something like that.
Yeah.
for
But yeah.
follow-up or other questions.
Yeah, I think all of us are fully capable of understanding a format like that and not expecting you guys to all be able to answer every question with 100% knowledge behind it. We're all living life outside of this room and these roles that we play.
Thank you. I don't have any particular goal with this, but do we have-
So just in efforts of recognizing my time, right, and Sol's parenting for the foreseeable. Is it possible that we could do that in a Zoom format for the board as well?
Do what?
The Q&A conversation, or are we thinking it has to be in person?
Well, you can do it that way as well. That's what I'm saying, you can incorporate.
We were actually originally talking about, until you went down the road of being interactive, was taking the questions ahead of time and creating a video response that people could look at.
And then
Right.
reference if they needed it.
Right, but this is more interactive, which is to Damien's point, it's kind of combines the two, where you're not, doing that and having a night out once a quarter or.
Sure.
I think part of this is really, we're still gearing up, right, for September. We just got the superintendent's goals nailed down. You're doing the board's goals. We know we need to do community conversations. I think we have to sort of look at the calendar and just say, okay, what's reasonable?
Well, and again, I think after our goals are fixed,
Mhm.
then we're looking at strategies for those goals. We're looking at what, again, can be accommodated.
I have a question.
Go
Go ahead.
Okay, what we can actually quantify,
Mhm.
and what data we can pull from what we're doing, that shows change or growth. And so it feels like actionable items at this point are to say, yes, this checks a box for our community. So let's, put that under like possible strategies to figure out who figures this out
Mhm.
at this point. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And we all have to recognize that our most valuable asset is our time.
Yes.
And you are volunteers, as one of you said. And, we've got the district goals, so it's all about how do we calendar it and make it reasonable for everyone.
The only other question I would have in this whole thing is that when people email a question and you decide not to answer it, are you at least going to address the fact that you're not answering the question?
Oh, and that's something we should certainly talk about, how we do that, whether it's off the top of my head. And this is why I don't want to do this, but.
Then don't do it,
No.
but it's good food for thought.
We're in a position where we can talk something through. So off the top of my head, I would say that we would respond to them in email. Unless it was specifically called out, they wanted this here. And then we would also note, and we'll be responding to this question in the video. The monthly or bi-monthly video or whatever it is.
Christy has a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind everyone that also when there's questions, the website, we try to put as much information on there as possible to answer questions. And there's a search engine in the top right corner.
That works pretty well.
That you can
Try it.
type in whatever you're looking for the most part. And it should come up with a list of different sites that might mention that.
So if you try board minutes, it should come up. To your point, if you can find them, you should find them pretty easily if you put it in search.
And then the same thing for board docs, which is linked on the website, which has all the board minutes and the agendas all the way back to, I scanned them all the way back to 1950s. But the policies are there, so you can also search there if you're looking for something specific on a board policy or a board, when did the board decide this? You can look it up on board docs.
You go into board docs and put in civility, right? And it comes up with the 4 or 5 policies that relate to civility. So it's pretty robust if you spend a little time.
And then what we're
figuring
doing,
it out.
and then the other thing is I just want to remind everyone that the South Movies Navigator newsletter that comes out twice a month. We try to get as much information from across the district that you might, what we think you might need or need to know. And that comes out, and if you want to subscribe to it, if you're not already receiving it, it goes to all staff, all families, all students, and any community member who wants it, you can get an email, but it's also on the website. They go all the way back to when they've been created, so you can see any of the old ones. But there's lots of ways to get information outside of waiting for a board meeting. That's what I'm trying to say.
Patsy Wilfred Langley. I said I was gonna do it every time. This won't take away you recording it and posting it, however. Would you still post the full Q&A public
I would say
forum? So, okay.
I think there's a lot of details to work out, but for the purposes of tonight's meeting, I think arriving at a decision that this is worth further exploration feels like what we can achieve this evening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, we had several things on the agenda where that was, the goal that I had at least was, do we want to do something like this or not? And
Right.
so,
And these questions about how it would be implemented are great, and the suggestion to weave this in with other ideas that have been floated are great.
so are there any other comments or questions on this agenda item?
So, thanks, Chair, Larry Christensen. I think this format here this evening, every bit of it has been worthwhile, and I really appreciate, the board and the entire audience, both sides. It gets a little hot sometimes. I think it's really important that we do have these open discussions. Otherwise, once they're suppressed, they can go in different directions that isn't beneficial to any of us. you know.
Board workshops are my favorite ones.
Yeah,
Because we
and-
get to have that discussion.
Right, you know, and I didn't, this was the first one that I've been involved with here. Really appreciate it. So like to get that out of the way, go back to one thing though, much earlier on. I feel a little disenfranchised because the board's goals seem to be weighted heavier towards student direction. Whereas someone that has actually paid the bills for over 30 years here now, you know, and elected officials, that I thought that, you know, the constituents, actually the board would be more responsive to the bottom line, you know, the finances and everything. And then the administration of the school comes with representing the students more and have the combination there. So to me, it's a little bit heavier weighted. I also am uncomfortable, you know, I've been a businessman all my life, and I look for, you know, future employees. This gets weighted a lot heavier than on philosophy, you know, all the social work, which is great. I believe in all that, but you also have to do, you know, the reading, writing, arithmetic, and it kind of seems like it's missing, or at least it's weak. If I were to invest in a business, whereas the school is a business, I wouldn't invest in it like this to see the product that I'm looking for, the future employees. So that's just my honest opinion.
Thank you for sharing that. We do appreciate honest opinions. I would note that our second goal for the, one of our three goals, our second goal for the superintendent is directly related to student learning. And that's, like we're talking about Dr. Campbell, is these equity issues are not going to be layered on top. They're not going to take time away from reading, writing, and arithmetic. The goal is to weave them in, so it's part of this whole, this whole that turns people into productive graduates prepared for a diverse and dynamic world.
And I would also add that I think it's safe to say that when I speak to the constituents in the community, they're asking me to put students first. I know having worked in districts where that wasn't necessarily felt at a board level, it didn't feel good to teach in. And I think that I can be rest assured that I am upholding what my constituents are asking me to do and putting students first. And I will continue.
That's our mission is to educate.
Yeah.
It's to educate our students.
And we can't do that without looking at the financials also.
But our
Clearly.
financials are sound.
Yeah.
So real quick follow-up, I'm nervous. I just saw the report out of Oregon, where now the requirements for graduating high school, they don't have the requirements of passing reading, writing, or math.
That's not true in the state of Washington. There's 7
I know, but
pathways.
it's, I
There's
get
7
nervous that
pathways
this
to
is the
graduation.
direction that that's
Those
going.
were recently adopted last year, and they actually increased the rigor of student attainment on tests to where students who qualify for special education services or students who have disabilities covered under 504 can no longer pass at a level 2. They have to pass at a level 3 and or take a CTE pathway. So they've actually increased their rigor on our pathways to graduation.
One of the things we talked about with Dr. Campbell today in the training was, I think she had a great quote. I don't know if they were her words or words she had heard elsewhere, but rigor without support is cruelty.
Yep.
And what she was proposing is a pathway towards building the support that underpins the academic rigor that supports every student to be successful in the reading, writing, arithmetic.
And part of that was also that support without rigor is useless fluffing.
Yes.
So it is very intentional to combine academic and social emotional work.
We actually have very successful graduates who go on to 4-year universities, 2-year colleges, military, world of work, who are prepared through. We have a requirement in our district that students actually take 2 career and technical ed credits as opposed to the 1 that the state requires, because we believe that they also need hands-on learning so that they can go into the trades if that's a choice that they want to make. So we really have done a lot of work around getting our students ready for the world of work. Their, behaviors that we all sort of take for granted. Are you going to be on time? Are you going to have a good work ethic? Are you going to be able to respond to your supervisor? Do you know how to balance a checkbook? And when we are doing these kinds of activities that help our students to be prepared, we're in conversation right now over social issues because that is what we're in conversation about. But it doesn't mean it's at the expense of the academic rigor that we have had in place. And we've heard people say, well, your scores aren't great. Well, our graduation rate is one of the top in the state. So yeah, sometimes along the way, we have some weak spots, but our graduates leave us well prepared. And they come back to us saying that they were well prepared. So we've got our work cut out for us, no doubt. But again, we're a district that's doing good things for our kids. So
Well, and finding those weak spots is what we're working on.
that's
right
the
now.
whole point, is exposing our own weaknesses and working on them.
And I'd also note that we actually have 3 graduates of the district here on the board. So we do come back and try to,
And
Try to
those
give
number more
back.
in the room.
Yes.
Support that global society.
Wait a minute. I'm a graduate of Langley.
I said of the district.
You did say the
I did
district.
not say
Okay,
Salt Lake High
just
School.
checking.
Yeah, I said the district.
I was just gonna say that, as you address, the school is meeting the requirements for
Can you speak up just a little bit?
the school is by doing this work, trying to better meet the requirements for academics. But they're also trying to prepare their students for the world outside of Whitby. And although for a lot of people, not addressing equity issues works for them, for those of us who are a part of marginalized communities, it doesn't work for us. And so I feel like by changing these things and by addressing the parts of education that don't work for people who are marginalized, you're making our education work for everyone and making us go into the world ready to, I guess, be global citizens. That's the mission statement sets. You're preparing them to, you're making the world more equitable. And that is, so this is not just about school and academics. This is about how we want our world to be.
Well, I guess I'm still an American, not a global citizen, so.
Exactly.
Wendy.
What's that?
Are you implying that they're non-American?
I'll always talk
Excuse
about-
me, excuse me. Let's keep the crosstalk to a minimum here. Wendy has the.
Future meetings, I really struggled hearing, and I know you people at that in front struggle with hearing. And unfortunately, we can't read lips. I'm used to reading lips when I can't hear someone who are not special agents hearing loss. So my recommendation going forward would be maybe, I know some people are nervous getting up in front of people when they speak. In some places, there's a mic in the back and a mic in the front, and I don't expect y'all to have a mic, but maybe a mic between like each 3 group. Because if people can't hear it, it's not equitable and it's kind of just doing a lot of movement, but no one can hear anything. And I know there's a cost in that, but we need to make these meetings equitable, not just happen.
Absolutely.
It's
yeah.
coming. We've got the equipment on order.
Yeah.
It's somewhere over in Holmes Harbor on a ship. Oh, no.
Thank you for centering that, because I know that is something that is a concern of ours, and we are going to keep trying to improve how we do this. I think that that's everything we've got. I was hoping to end on the wisdom of one of our current scholars, but thank you for putting that in, and I think that's a great note to end on. This meeting is adjourned.